Beyond the Mage. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 126 Course Selection. Below the quote from the first dean on the title page, there's a helpful reminder. The Academy's Logistics Department offers a wide selection of well-paid Academy missions for students to take on. Additionally, the Academy has a dedicated trading area for internal student transactions. Students who have mastered magical skills can earn money by crafting corresponding magical items. Gata calculated his savings. 212 gold and 15 silver. This was certainly less than those second-generation mages with family support. But at least it ensured he wouldn't have to worry about tuition fees in his first year and could freely choose courses that interested him. Without this savings, Gata would be heading to the Logistics Department to take on Academy missions and earn tuition. And limited by tuition fees, he certainly wouldn't be able to select all the courses he was interested in. He'd have to squeeze them out one by one, instead of choosing courses based solely on his interest, unlike now. This precisely validated the first half of the first statement made by the first dean, Ronan Hori. The money in our hands is a tool for maintaining freedom. For the next hour, Gata carefully read through the introductions to all the courses offered by the Academy. He gained a deeper understanding of the situation at Cyrus Academy. Then, he put down the scroll introducing the courses and opened another scroll, which served as admission approval. It recorded Gata's basic information, the Academy's approved admission information, and his tutor's information, finally bearing the stamp of the Academy Committee. After this, Gata would use this scroll to report to his assigned tutor. Hosey O'Kenley, Senior Tutor, 3rd Ring Mage, Head of Rune Department, Chief Rune Tutor, 3rd Tier Rune Master, specializing in rune analysis and reconstruction, rune construction. The scroll only contained this simple introduction to his assigned tutor. Gata frowned slightly. It wasn't that he was dissatisfied with the tutor assigned by the Academy. How could he be dissatisfied with a 3rd Ring Mage as his tutor? The reason for the frown was that Hosey O'Kenley was the Academy's chief rune instructor. Gata had already researched this beforehand. At Cyrus Academy, instructors were crucial to students, even influencing their development and future achievements. The most direct point was that for a student to successfully graduate from the Academy, their instructor's approval was essential. According to Cyrus Academy's regulations, to graduate, the following conditions must be met. 1. Completion of all required courses with passing grades or higher. This is the most basic requirement. Failing to achieve this disqualifies one from being a qualified mage. 2. Obtaining at least 100 credits. This is the minimum credit requirement, ensuring each student achieves a certain depth and breadth of knowledge. 3. Achieving at least a 1st Ring Mage level. This is the minimum level requirement. Failing to qualify as a formal mage disqualifies one from graduating from Cyrus Academy. 4. Completing a graduation project and passing the Academy Committee's review. To graduate, students need to comprehensively apply their knowledge, spells, and even theories to conduct in-depth research and practice on a specific problem, completing a concrete design or research project. This is a comprehensive test of the student's knowledge and skills. The mentor plays a crucial role in this process, not only providing knowledge, resources, and opportunities, but also directly determining whether the student's graduation project can be successfully submitted for review and the final evaluation received. According to Gata's understanding, the relationship between mentor and student at Cyrus Academy is similar to that between a mentor and graduate student in his previous life. Based on normal circumstances, it's highly likely that Hosey O'Kenley, as the head of the Rune Department, will teach students about runes. Even the research direction he provides for students' graduation projects will most likely be in the field of rune literature. In other words, since becoming Hosey O'Kenley's student, Gata will inevitably have to learn about rune literature. The problem lies here. Rune masters, as one of the 3 major families of magical artisans, have always been the most mysterious, and their entry requirements are widely recognized as the highest. Before this, Gata had never been exposed to rune literature, and didn't even know what it was. He wasn't sure if he would like the course or if he could master it. However, the tutor assignment was already set. Even if Gauda found out later that he wasn't suited for rune literature, he would have almost no chance to change tutors. Sigh, Gauda sighed slightly. In his previous life, graduate students could choose their tutors through a two-way selection process. Here, it was a blind selection. He could only accept it as it came. Fortunately, Gauda, who had always had excellent grades, had never encountered a subject he couldn't master, so he was somewhat confident. At Sears Academy, all courses and subjects were chosen by the students themselves, without any mandatory requirements. Even compulsory courses could be postponed until graduation. Of course, wanting to graduate from the academy without completing the required courses and credits was wishful thinking. After understanding all the courses offered by the academy, Gauda returned to the committee building, entered the lobby, and went to the course selection counter. The receptionist was an elderly man in his 50s or 60s, wearing a blue robe. He sat behind a wide counter, leisurely sipping tea, the aroma filling the air. As Gauda approached, the old man put down his teacup and asked with a smile, "Young man, are you here to choose courses?" "Yes," Gauda nodded, then handed over his identification badge. The old man took the badge and swiped it on the alchemy machine in front of the counter. "Oh, a freshman. What courses are you planning to take?" Gauda had already made his decision and slowly announced the names of the courses he planned to take in his first year: basic mage courses, spell application and combat, and basic cultural courses. First were the 3 compulsory courses, which were undoubtedly essential. The first 2 compulsory courses, basic mage courses, were divided into 3 stages, requiring at least 3 years to complete. The first stage cost a flat 10 gold coins and was worth 1 credit. The basic culture course can be completed in 1 academic year, earning 3 credits, but it's more expensive at 20 gold coins. In addition, Gauda also chose a sub-course under basic culture course, Geography of Nolan Continent and War Geography, worth 2 credits and costing 20 gold coins. He also chose a sub-course under spell application and combat, Understanding General Spells, 0 and 3 ranks, worth 1 credit and costing 10 gold coins. Both courses are knowledge-based, with the assessment consisting of a written test. As long as students attend classes and spend some time memorizing the textbook, failing the assessment is almost guaranteed. These types of courses are known as easy courses by students in the academy, the best choice for easily earning credits. However, Gauda chose these 2 courses not for the easy credits, but simply because he felt the content was very useful. Geography of Nolan Continent and War Geography would allow him to better understand the world, while Understanding General Spells, 0 and 3 ranks, would fill the gap in his understanding of spells. Chapter 127 Cultivation Room. Gauda also chose runeology. Regardless of how difficult the course was or whether he would be interested, since his assigned tutor was the head of the runeology department, how could he not choose runeology? He needed to be on the right track. Gauda understood this basic social etiquette. He could only choose the first stage of runeology, which would earn him 1 credit and cost 10 gold coins. The runeology course had 7 stages, earning 28 credits upon completion. In contrast, the other 2 of the 3 major schools, potions and alchemy, only had 5 stages, yielding 15 credits. This difference alone showed that runeology had a very high entry barrier. Finally, Gauda also chose 2 sub-courses under potions, general knowledge of herbs and plant cultivation. These were his areas of interest. The former would allow him to hunt feline creatures in the wild without missing valuable plants or potion materials from them, while the latter was where his bloodline lay. Who from a Chinese family doesn't like farming? Especially since anyone with the idea of making money through potion concoctions needs a herb garden. Correspondingly, to operate a herb garden, polymorphic cultivation is a required course. Both courses are worth 2 credits, and the course fee is 20 gold coins each. "Are you sure you want to choose so many courses?" The old man was surprised after hearing Gauda's choices. Gauda had chosen a total of 8 courses, including the notoriously difficult runeology. If he could complete all of them and pass the assessment, he would earn a full 13 credits in his first year. Even among all the previous students at Sears Academy, very few had chosen so many courses in their first year. He could be called a bookworm king. Gauda nodded slightly. I'm sure, in fact, he wanted to choose even more courses. However, he hadn't yet grasped the difficulty of these courses, so he was conservatively choosing them for now. If he completed the later courses smoothly, Gauda would choose additional courses. The old man didn't offer any further advice, he just needed to do his job. As for the students being too ambitious, choosing a bunch of courses, ultimately neglecting some and wasting a lot of time and money only to fail the assessments, that wasn't his problem. Everyone had to be responsible for their own choices. The General Spells Introduction course is full for this term. You'll need to wait until the next term to enroll, the old man said methodically, glancing at the course schedule. Wait, but the next moment, as if he'd discovered something, he looked up sharply at Gauda and couldn't help but ask, "You have the highest authority?" Gauda thought for a moment, confirming that the so-called highest treatment should be equivalent to the highest authority, and nodded. The old man opened his mouth, then finally said, "You have the highest authority. According to the Academy's regulations, you have priority in course selection, therefore, you don't need to wait for the next term to start General Spell Introduction, you can directly enter this term's course. There are 8 courses in total: Mage Basics Phase 1, Spell Application and Combat Phase 1, Basic Culture, and Rune Literature Phase 1, the old man confirmed. You need to pay a total of 120 gold coins for the courses, the old man said. Gauda had already calculated the fees he needed to pay before coming, but now that it was time, he found himself quite distressed. Gauda took out his money pouch, reluctantly counted out 120 sign-in gold coins, and pushed them to the old man. The old man chuckled as he accepted Gauda's tuition fee, then, after a few operations on the alchemy machine, returned Gauda's identity badge to him. "It's registered for you, thank you," Gauda said politely, inwardly agonizing. His savings had fallen below the 100 gold coin mark. More accurately, it had plummeted to 92 gold and 17 silver. After selecting his courses and leaving the committee building, Gauda checked the time. It was already past 3 p.m. This was clearly not a suitable time for reporting. Therefore, he decided to report to his mentor tomorrow. His next destination was the training building, which he had been curious about for a long time. Coincidentally, Gauda had replenished 10 sets of basic magic potions on the 22nd of Harvest Month. Now, on the 22nd of Dark Night Month, he had just used up his 10 sets of basic magic potions. If the training rooms in the training building were effective, as long as they weren't too much worse than the basic magic potions, Gauda planned to move to the training rooms. After all, the daily cost of 2 gold coins for magic potions was a real burden for him, who now also had to pay for course selection. The training building was also a separate building. And because it was a training ground, the area was very quiet. The training building wasn't far from the committee and was located on the only way between the first district and the committee. So Gauda quickly arrived at the training building. The exterior of the training building was extremely classical and simple. The truly valuable part of this building is the magic node array beneath its foundation. In front of the training building stands a statue of Ronan Hogg, the first headmaster of Cyrus Academy. He was a 5th circle archmage, said to be infinitely close to a 6th circle mage, but unfortunately, his ascension failed. It was past 3 p.m., class time for many students. Even so, there were still quite a few students coming and going from the training building. After all, besides the dormitories, the training building was probably the most frequently visited place for students in the academy. The students coming and going didn't pay much attention to Gauda. Everyone was busy with their own things. Gauda walked towards the training building. A magic circle enveloped the entrance. The student's identification badge served as the access key. After swiping his badge, Gauda entered one of the most important buildings in Cyrus Academy. The first floor of the training building was also a large hall. The hall was somewhat deserted, with a reception counter. Gauda walked to the counter and looked at the young woman in charge of reception. "Hello, would you like to use the basic training room or rent a high-level training room?" The woman, her hair styled in a bun, glanced at Gauda, and after confirming he was a new face, smiled and said, "You can see the specific prices and requirements here." She pointed to the signs hanging in front of the counter. Gauda's gaze swept over them. Basic training room, magic concentration 10, free for all registered students. Tier 1 training room, magic concentration 46, rental fee. 10 silver 2 hours, rental requirement. 10 credits or more. Tier 2 training room, magic concentration 215, rental fee. 2 gold 2 hours, rental requirement. 50 credits or more. Tier 3 training room, magic concentration 1000, rental fee. 10 gold 2 hours, not open to students. The training room level is determined by the magic concentration value, and the classification standard strictly follows the spiritual land classification standard. An area with a magic concentration greater than 10 can be called a basic spiritual land, sufficient to allow mage apprentices to quickly improve their progress in guiding spell cultivation. A magic concentration of 46 or higher qualifies as a Tier 1 spiritual land, sufficient for a first-rank mage to cultivate. A magic concentration of 215 or higher qualifies as a Tier 2 spiritual land. A magic concentration of 1000 or higher qualifies as a Tier 3 spiritual land, and so on. The magic concentration in the Academy's training rooms is precisely at the critical point of each tier. "Give me a basic training room," Gata said. The receptionist with her hair up flipped through her booklet and said, "Training room number 37 on the second floor. Once inside, swipe your identity badge to activate the magic node array." "Thank you," Gata nodded and went up the stairs to the second floor. The training building has 6 floors in total. The first, second, and third floors are basic training rooms, the fourth floor contains Tier 1 training rooms, the fifth floor contains Tier 2 training rooms, and the sixth floor contains Tier 3 training rooms. The second floor is a long, narrow corridor with basic training rooms on both sides, estimated to be 60 or 70 in total. Following the door number, Gata found his assigned basic training room, number 37, with a main door wide open. The training room was small, only 3 or 4 square meters. However, unlike martial arts training, which requires space to practice techniques, mage training only requires sitting cross-legged and focusing on guiding spells. This space was more than enough. For mages, the most important aspect of the training environment was the concentration of magic power, not comfort. Gauda entered training room 37, closed the door, and then, as instructed by the receptionist, swiped his identity badge on the magic circle at the entrance. The next moment, the concentration of magic power in the training room began to slowly rise. At the entrance, there was a crude alchemical artifact resembling a display screen, a magic power detector, displaying the concentration of magic power in the training room. Gauda waited for almost a minute, watching as the magic power concentration displayed on the detector rose from 2 to 12 before finally stabilizing. The magic power node array could regulate the concentration of magic power at each node within the array area, but some small fluctuations were inevitable. Therefore, the magic concentration in the training room indicated on the sign at the reception counter is not an exact value, but a very conservative lower limit. Sears Academy guarantees that the magic concentration in the training room will never be lower than the value indicated on the sign. Gauda sat cross-legged and began circulating the apprentice guidance technique, starting his training for the day. Upon entering a meditative state, he saw extremely abundant stardust, representing magic, floating around him, emitting specks of starlight, almost gathering into a clump. With the circulation of the guidance technique, this almost gathered stardust, like a long dragon, was guided into Gauda's body, then slowly refined and transformed into his own mana. While the training efficiency was not as high as taking basic magic potions, it was far superior to training without any mana. Gauda immediately immersed himself in this feeling, focusing intently on his training, unable to extricate himself. Time slowly passed. Chapter 128 Leak-Free Water. After nearly 2 hours of cultivation, Gauda opened his eyes. Not as efficient as the basic magic potion, but it's about 40% more effective, he thought to himself, assessing his progress. After taking the basic magic potion, 1 day's cultivation progress was equivalent to 5 days of naked cultivation. However, cultivating in the basic training room was equivalent to 2 days of naked cultivation. The difference was significant, but the former cost 2 gold coins per day, while the latter cost 0. As expected of the renowned Sears Academy, these training rooms were free to use. Just relying on free training rooms, in just 1 or 2 years, Sears Academy students could widen the gap in mage levels with mages who didn't have access to training rooms. I'll try the first tier training room tomorrow, Gauda decided. The basic training room's improvement in cultivation speed was acceptable, but not enough to satisfy Gauda. If he used the first tier training room, the speed would meet his expectations. He had also just met the credit requirements for renting a first tier training room. After finishing his cultivation, Gauda swiped his identity badge again, returned to the basic cultivation room, and left the cultivation building, heading to the dining hall. Today's specialty dish was devil's tail. Despite the unusual name, compared to the restaurant's previous specialties, devil's tail was surprisingly normal. It was essentially a sausage made primarily of venison, marinated in salt and spices. The venison was the main ingredient. The special effect after eating it was that Gata felt much more energetic. The taste was also quite good, the venison was rich, and the spices were fragrant, intertwining to instantly awaken the taste buds. In fact, the specialty dishes offered by the Academy's dining hall, besides having some additional therapeutic effects, shared another common characteristic: no matter how exotic the ingredients, the taste was actually quite good. Back in Building 30 of Zone 1, Gata went to the small kitchen on the first floor. There was a ceramic jar there. A thought struck Gata, and with a flow of magical power, the previously empty jar seemed to have gained an invisible spring, gushing liquid. In a few seconds, 2 gallons of liquid appeared in the earthenware jar, water creation spell plus. Gata sniffed, and as expected, he smelled the rich, sweet aroma of honey again. Since arriving at Cyrus Academy, he had continued his daily draw, but so far, all he'd gotten were the guaranteed honey water. He'd gotten used to it and almost stopped having high expectations. It was just a habit driving him to do the daily draw. Besides, honey water was indeed easier to drink than plain water. Drinking honey water every day was better than drinking plain water every day. But this time, Gata didn't smell that familiar sweet aroma. He was stunned for a moment, then suddenly realized he'd got a reward. The next moment, a message flashed into Gata's mind like an inspiration. Leak-free water. The human body constantly dissipates energy. Drinking leak-free water can reduce this energy dissipation. Yes, this time, the random liquid created by Water Creation Technique Plus was no longer honey water, but a mysterious liquid called leak-free water. Before this, Gata had never heard of leak-free water. Fortunately, the inspiration sparked by Water Creation Technique Plus told him about its effects. Reduce energy dissipation. Gata pondered for a moment, thinking it could be roughly understood as reducing metabolism. Human activities all consume energy, including even the simplest breathing. This corresponds perfectly to the idea that the human body constantly dissipates energy. The effect of leak-free water is to reduce this consumption. The resulting benefit should be better physical fitness and more energy? That seems like a temporary understanding. However, considering this is a supernatural world, the energy dissipated by the human body should not only be heat, but also much more related to supernatural powers. Why not just try it and see? Since the leak-free water seemed harmless, Gata decided to stop speculating and directly taste the herbs. He scooped up a large cup of the leak-free water, and even before tasting it, a unique and delicate fragrance wafted towards him. This stuff smells so good. Not only does it smell good, but once the leak-free water entered his mouth, Gata found its taste even more remarkable. It was somewhat like fruit wine, sweet and refreshing, yet with a slightly stimulating sensation, like soda. Furthermore, it had a lingering sweetness that could be savored repeatedly, similar to tea. In short, this was the best tasting thing Gata had ever drunk since arriving in this world. Attracted by the flavor, he drank several more cups in one go, consuming almost a liter before stopping. Most importantly, after drinking the leak-free water, Gata felt as if his entire body was clear and refreshed, becoming exceptionally energetic. The fatigue from cultivation seemed to have dissipated considerably. Wait a minute, Gata suddenly realized. The 2 factors limiting a mage's cultivation time are mental energy and mental fatigue. Mental energy can be restored through meditation, but fatigue generated during cultivation can only be recovered through rest. Therefore, each mage has a limited daily cultivation time. Forcing oneself to practice more while fatigued is not only inefficient but also negatively impacts the next day's cultivation, resulting in more harm than good. Now, Gata clearly felt his fatigue from cultivation dissipate considerably, as if he had taken a nap. Does that mean I can continue cultivating? This thought, once it surfaced, was impossible to suppress. Gata went to the meditation room on the 2nd floor, sat cross-legged, and began trying to circulate the guiding technique again. Time passed quietly. Half an hour later, Gata suddenly opened his eyes. It wasn't an illusion, he was both surprised and astonished. After drinking the leak-free water, his cultivation time had indeed been extended by half an hour. Why isn't the leak-free water a guaranteed minimum? Gata clenched his fists in frustration. Having experienced the wonders of the leak-free water, he naturally wished he could drink it every day. However, after so many days, this was the first time Gata had obtained leak-free water through the Water Creation Technique Plus. It was clear that the drop rate of leak-free water was not high. What bothered Gauda most was that leak-free water only existed for one natural day before automatically dissipating. Thinking of this, he got up and went back to the kitchen, drinking nearly a liter of leak-free water again. 2 gallons of leak-free water was almost 10 liters. Gauda decided to drink all 2 gallons of leak-free water within the day, not wasting a single drop. Dark night moon, the 23rd. Gauda woke up half an hour earlier than usual. He had slept exceptionally well last night after drinking the leak-free water. Upon waking, Gauda felt incredibly energetic, his mind clear, and his condition much better than usual. He hadn't even felt much hunger overnight. The magic of the leak-free water continued to manifest. So Gauda went to the kitchen and gulped down in nearly 2 liters of leak-free water. Now he was completely satisfied. Maintaining his good habit, Gauda exercised according to his original training plan. During this training, Gauda clearly felt that his physical exertion was less. So he simply increased the intensity of his training. After exercising, he showered in the washroom, changed into the standard student's uniform issued by the academy, and left Building 30 in Zone 1. It was time to report to his instructor. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129. There are always some surprising encounters. The climate of the Duchy of Sienne is extremely hot. Even though it's already the dark moon, more than a month after the hottest sun moon, the air still exudes a wild and intense heat. Gauda walked slowly along the roads of Sierre's Academy, observing the diverse architectural styles on both sides. Every brick seemed to gleam with the glorious light of this ancient academy, radiating an aura of power. No one could have imagined, including Gauda himself, that a mere apprentice who, just 6 months ago, was worried about his life in Hogan City, would come to Saint-Sienne City, the heart of the Duchy of Sienne, and join the most sacred Mage Academy in the entire duchy. Life is truly wondrous. Gauda followed the academy's main road to the teaching area. The building housing the rune department came into view. It was a solid, cold black building with 2 signs, one reading rune department, and the other Gavin building. Gauda had already figured out the naming conventions of the buildings in the academy. The name Gawain Tower likely indicates that the building was constructed during Gavin Hogg's tenure as dean. This suggests it's a relatively new building. Gauda swiped his identification badge, easily passing through the magic circle surrounding Gavin Tower and entering. The building was quiet. He could even clearly hear the monotonous sound of his shoes hitting the floor. This was because the rune department had the fewest students and instructors of all the departments in the academy. The reason was simple and straightforward: runeology was too difficult. Too many people couldn't even get past the basics. Yet, the rune department, with the fewest students, was allocated such a brand new and independent building. Even within the entire academy, very few departments had their own independent building. This further demonstrates that while runeology was difficult, it lived up to its difficulty and was highly valued. Indeed, rune masters were always considered the foremost of the 3 great families of magical craftsmen. Gauda continued down the corridor and finally encountered a student. "Hello, I'd like to ask where Professor Lizai's office is," he asked as he stepped forward. "You need to see Professor Lizai." The student looked quite old, probably a long-time student. He noticed Gauda's unfamiliar face and asked cautiously. Gauda nodded and answered truthfully, "I'm a freshman, and my assigned professor is Professor Lizai. I've come to report to him today." "You've been assigned to Professor Lizai's program? How is that possible? Professor Lizai never accepts students." The older student looked surprised, then seemed to remember something. "You're the freshman who entered with Dean Gavin's recommendation letter?" "Yes, that's me." Gauda didn't feel embarrassed and readily admitted it. No wonder. According to the Academy's regulations, students who enter with the highest level of admission cannot be refused by any professor, regardless of which professor they are assigned to. The older student looked knowing. Professor Lizai's office is on the top floor, but he's usually not in his office. He spends most of his time in the rune workshop. If you want to find him, go to the rune workshop on the 3rd floor. He thought for a moment and told Gauda. "Thank you," Gauda said gratefully, and then he and the old student parted ways. However, he didn't notice that after he left, the old student glanced back at his retreating figure. A hint of pity flashing in his eyes. Gauda went up to the 3rd floor and arrived at the rune workshop, which occupied almost half of the floor. The door to the rune workshop was wide open, without any barriers. Gauda hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. A large workshop, resembling a laboratory from a science fiction film, appeared before Gauda's eyes. The workshop was brightly and softly lit, clearly designed for precise operation. The walls were covered with various rune diagrams and corresponding analytical illustrations. In the center of the workshop was a spacious and brightly lit workbench, made of a special material, engraved with many intricate magical runes. Scattered on the workbench were casually piled draft papers and various tools, including engraving knives made of adamantite, wedge-shaped scrapers, and pens made of various precious magical materials. Adjacent to the workbench was a dedicated area for engraving runes, surrounded by a protective barrier to prevent accidents. In addition, there were 3 towering bookshelves filled with various books, scrolls, and manuscripts. This was what was visible on the surface. In reality, this rune workshop contained many designs unseen by Gauda. These included a powerful energy supply system, advanced elemental manipulation magic arrays, and various invisible warning runes and monitoring arrays, capable of monitoring various anomalies at any time and promptly triggering alarms and activating corresponding defensive measures. Inside the workshop, there was a small room, but its door was currently closed. Gauda scanned the area but didn't find anyone. Either Director Hizai wasn't in the workshop, or he was in the small room inside the rune workshop. Gauda thought for a moment, then knocked on the open door, making a noticeable sound in the quiet rune workshop, and loudly announced to the empty workshop, "New students Gauda, reporting to Instructor Hizai Alkin." His voice echoed in the workshop. The next moment, from the small room inside the workshop, an old but calm, composed, and emotionless voice rang out. "Have you ever studied runeology before?" "Never," Gauda replied honestly. "Read the documents on the table first, then you can leave." The voice directly issued the instruction to Gauda, without any pleasantries or greetings. It didn't even come out to greet him. It seemed a bit too cold, but Gauda didn't feel uncomfortable. In fact, he didn't like so-called polite small talk. He not only didn't dislike this straightforward approach to assigning tasks, but even somewhat liked it. Gauda nodded, then realized that through the door, how could the other person see his nod? He chuckled, didn't add anything, and silently walked to the central workbench. However, seeing the messy documents and papers scattered around, Gauda paused for a moment. So, which of these documents did Jose Okanli want him to read? Gauda's gaze quickly swept over the papers and documents. He first ruled out those extremely complex rune diagrams and analyses. As someone who had never studied runeology, he simply couldn't understand them. As the head of the rune department, his eye wouldn't let a complete novice look at this right away. Then, he ruled out those profound explanations of principles. For the same reason, he only wanted things he could understand at a glance. Gauda didn't ask Hizai Okanli what the material he wanted was, because he thought it would be foolish. He selected based on his experience. Soon, an open booklet caught Gauda's attention. It was a handwritten notebook, the text entirely handwritten. The pages were very old, even yellowed, with wrinkled edges, clearly showing its age. The reason Gauda noticed it was simple: he could understand what was written in the notebook. Runes seem complex, but in reality, there are patterns to follow. As long as the most fundamental rules are set at the beginning, everything can gradually evolve and calculate on its own. This must be the basic theory and concept of rune literature. Seeing this general outline, Gauda immediately recognized the handwritten notebook. It was definitely introductory theory to rune literature. Perfect for a complete novice like him. This must be the document that Jose Okanli wanted him to see. Gauda continued reading. 6 Basic Rules of Runes. Rule 1. Under any circumstances, the actual robustness value generated by all runes in a magic circle must be less than the theoretical maximum robustness value that the magic circle can withstand, otherwise, the magic circle will fail. Rule 2. Multiple basic runes connected together form a composite rune, and multiple composite runes connected together form a magic circle. Each basic rune in a composite rune must be in pairs, and the energy ratio of each basic secondary rune to the basic higher level rune is 1:4 and 64%. However, if 2 identical secondary basic runes are connected, then in this combination, the energy generated by this pair of secondary basic runes is equal to that of the higher level rune, which is 4 and 64%, not 2. The energy of a level 0 rune is set to 1. The total energy of all composite runes in a magic circle is the sum of their energies. Rule 3. Any basic rune cannot be connected to more than 8 basic runes of the same level, nor can it be connected to more than 2 identical basic runes. Furthermore, the orientation of these 2 basic runes must be opposite, otherwise, the composite rune will not be effective. Rule 4. Runes must be inscribed on magic conducting materials. Magic conducting materials possess a resistivity, which measures the quality of their magic conducting performance. Resistivity reflects the material's ability to impede magic power. It is an inherent property of the material. The lower the resistivity, the less the material impedes magic power, and the better its magic conducting performance. Conversely, the higher the resistivity, the greater the material impedes magic power, and the worse its magic conducting performance. Resistivity can be determined through magic power testing. Rule 5. Within a magic circle, any 2 adjacent runes constitute a rune pair. The same rune can form multiple rune pairs with multiple adjacent runes. If any rune in a rune pair changes, it becomes a new rune pair. However, if 2 runes in a rune pair are of the same type, then the rune pair is an interference pair. Rule 6. The theoretical robustness of the magic circle is equal to the number of runes on the magic conducting material multiplied by the number of rune pairs multiplied by 1 magic resistance. The actual robustness is equal to the total energy of the magic circle multiplied by the number of interference pairs. The formula in chapter 130 is missing an interference constant. It doesn't seem as complicated as rumored. It's just a simple formula calculation, right? The formula's complexity is at most high school level, and the writing style is far too sloppy. After reviewing the 6 basic rules of runes recorded in his notes, this was the first thought that popped into Gauta's mind. So, to ensure the magic circle functions as effectively as possible, we should minimize the actual robustness value or maximize the theoretical robustness value. Minimizing the actual robustness value means minimizing the occurrence of 2 identical runes connected to reduce the number of interference pairs, and using as many lower energy secondary basic runes as possible to increase the number of runes. Increasing the maximum robustness value means increasing the number of runes and rune pairs, or choosing magic conducting materials with low magic resistance, but increasing the number of rune pairs also increases the number of interference pairs. This was the second thought that flashed through Gauta's mind. He subconsciously began to understand and derive the formula. After reviewing the 6 basic rules of runes again, combined with his understanding, Gauta had firmly memorized them. Only then did he confidently continue browsing. The first thing that caught his eye was an extremely simple illustration. The main element of the design was a large hexagon, cleverly divided into 6 equal regions by its 6 sides. Each region contained a pattern, 4 of which were identical hexagonal patterns, and 2 were square patterns. Each pattern in the 6 equal regions had one side coinciding with the central hexagon. Furthermore, the center of each pattern was marked with the numbers 0 and 1. Below the illustration was text explaining, assuming a simple magic circle can be constructed from a single composite rune, which consists of 7 basic runes, 5 level 0 basic runes and 2 level 1 basic runes. Based on the 6 basic rules of runes, calculate whether it can be successfully constructed on mithril material with a magic resistance of 1% and on brass material with a magic resistance of 45%. There were even homework exercises? Gauta thought to himself, while simultaneously grabbing a blank sheet of paper and a quill from the workbench and scribbling away. Each rune in this magic circle can connect to a maximum of 4 runes of the same level. 4Q equals 41.12. According to Rule 1, the magic circle can be successfully constructed when the guiding material is brass. R equals 0.45. According to Rule 6, Q equals Mn. 1R equals 711. 1 to 0.45 equals 42.35. Q equals En equals 20.562 equals 41.12. Since Q equals 42.35, Q equals 41.12, the magic circle can still be successfully constructed on brass guiding material. In less than 2 minutes, Gauta calculated the result. It was indeed a relatively basic and simple calculation problem. Anyone who understands these 6 basic rules of runes could quickly calculate the solution. Calculating the answer is not commendable. What is commendable is the person who summarized these 6 rules. It is because of these 6 basic rules that a complex problem can be calculated using a simple formula. Unexpectedly, he still had the chance to solve problems in this world. Familiar muscle memory was awakened, and Gauta felt a slight joy. Solving problems was inherently a pleasurable experience. Why do I always feel like something's missing? Gauda looked at the formulas he had listed on the answer sheet, unconsciously touching his chin, his eyes revealing an indescribable confusion and unease. His gaze swept over the formulas on the answer sheet, drawn according to the basic rules of runes, each step strictly following the theorems. Yet, the emptiness in his heart was something that had been there since birth and wouldn't go away. That feeling of missing something stubbornly persisted. If he had to describe it, it was like solving a math problem where all the conditions in the problem statement had been used, but some hidden key clue had been overlooked, causing the entire solution process to go astray. It must be an illusion. Gauda checked several more times carefully, and after confirming that his solution was complete, he finally put down the answer sheet, stopped thinking about it, and continued browsing. Based on the formula calculations of the 6 basic rules, this simple magic circle can be successfully constructed on both mithril and brass materials. However, in practice, the construction of the magic circle on brass material failed. Why did it fail? These were the last 2 sentences of the notebook. Below the question of why it failed, there was a smaller annotation. Rules 1 through 5 have been verified multiple times using various methods and confirmed to be correct. The reason for the failure is that the formula for Rule 6 is incorrect. The formula for Rule 6 already includes all variables appearing in the rune combination, and the calculation method has been derived multiple times. It is the most consistent with the rune arrangement rules and has the lowest error rate among all algorithms. Other algorithms have alarmingly high error rates, which is clearly unreasonable. Where's the problem? Looking at the final question mark, Gauda frowned, his thoughts already racing. Why did it fail? The theoretical robustness value on brass material was clearly greater than the actual robustness value of the magic circle. According to the rules, this should be sufficient to support the construction and operation of the magic circle. But this was not the case. That is, the formula mentioned in the annotation was incorrect. But where was the formula wrong? Gauda glanced again at the formula listed in Rule 6, Q equals Mn, 1R, Q equals En. That strange feeling of something being missing resurfaced in his mind, like an invisible hand gently plucking at his heartstrings. As his gaze lingered on the formula, Gauda became increasingly certain that something was indeed missing. It was almost instinctive that the formula itself might have a structural flaw, lacking a crucial correction term. Gauda came up with an explanation. People who study mathematics and are good at it, through long-term problem-solving training and experience accumulation, and having seen enough formulas, develop a certain ability. This ability is often called mathematical intuition. Mathematical intuition can help them, to some extent, perceive the possible structure and form of a formula. This allows them to make a preliminary guess about the solution to the problem or the form of the formula based on past experience and understanding of the formula. This process can include pattern recognition, perception of symmetry, and prediction of function behavior. Of course, while mathematical intuition is an important tool, very useful in the exploration and conjecture stages, guiding mathematicians to propose hypotheses and conjectures, it cannot replace proof. The true formulas and conclusions still need to be verified through rigorous logical reasoning and proof. Immersed in the formula, Gauda, following his intuition, subconsciously added a C after the actual robustness value Q equals En, Q equals ENC. Then, he nodded in satisfaction. It looked much better this way. Gauda's gaze returned to the last question in his notes. He thought for a moment and finally gave his answer at the end. The formula is missing a disturbance constant C. A constant is a number in mathematics that has a fixed and unchanging value. It does not change with the changes of other variables. It is a fixed number and can appear in any formula. Constants provide stability and a fixed reference point for formulas, enabling them to more accurately describe and predict various phenomena and processes. Anyone who has received a high school education can find that many formulas, whether in physics or mathematics, often contain a fixed and unchanging constant value in addition to variables. Many natural laws are also described by formulas that include constants. These constant terms reflect the basic properties or physical characteristics of natural laws. For example, the speed of light c, the gravitational constant g, etc. The famous mass-energy equivalence formula E equals mc2, if we remove the constant c, is left with only E equals m. This formula seems off, yet it appears to include all the variables in a nuclear reaction, just like the final question regarding the rune formula. After further thought, Gata added the word possibly to his answer. The formula may be missing a distracting constant C. This is much more rigorous. Chapter 131 A Man Like a Stone. After reviewing the materials Jose O'Kenley had assigned and completing the homework exercises and reflection questions, Gata placed his answer sheet under his notebook and silently left the rune workshop. Read the materials on the table first, then you can leave. This was Jose O'Kenley's instruction. Gata strictly followed the instructions. After he left, the large rune workshop fell into a long silence. Only after a very long time did a faint sound break the tranquility. It was the sound of the door to a small inner room being gently pushed open. Then, an old man, leaning on a cane, emerged. The old man wore an extremely simple, vintage gray robe, devoid of any patterns, almost plainly worn. His hair was gray, but meticulously combed. His forehead was wrinkled, and his eye sockets were slightly sunken, but his blue eyes were not cloudy, but as deep as lake water. The old man looked slightly tired. He was getting old, his energy waning, yet he was doing the most energy-consuming work. This was Jose O'Kenley, the mentor assigned to God. He hadn't taken on any students in a long time. And no one wanted to be his student. Although he was a third circle mage. Although his position at Cyrus Academy was senior mentor, head of the rune department, chief rune mentor. Although his specialty was rune constructs, hailed as the crown jewel of runic science. Although he was the only rune master in the entire Duchy of Shan capable of creating third-tier rune constructs. However, his research on rune logic and calculation was considered nonsense by other mentors in the rune department, and even by some of the few high-level rune masters in the entire Duchy of Shan, a dead end leading to a precipice. In fact, it wasn't just that. Long ago, in the most technologically advanced place on this continent, Jose O'Kenley's research had already been considered a fantasy, rejected more than once. All the students knew that following such a mentor would only lead to wasted youth, a dead end, or even failure to graduate. Furthermore, Jose wouldn't provide any resources. No one in the Duchy of Shan understood why Jose O'Kenley, who should have had a bright future and was already capable of creating third-tier rune constructs at a young age, was so deeply immersed in this misguided path and unable to extricate himself. Instead of improving his mage level, his rune knowledge, or attempting to create fourth-tier rune constructs that could change the Duchy of Shan's ecosystem and elevate him to instant success, he devoted all his time and energy to something even a layman could tell was doomed to fail. 50 years ago, Jose O'Kenley could easily create third-tier rune constructs. 50 years later, he had made no progress. Other rune instructors had advised him, Dean Sharian had advised him, and even King Jairus Zai of the Duchy of Shan had personally advised him. Everyone hoped he would abandon this misguided path and return to the right track. But Jose O'Kenley was like the gold ore in the mines beneath Cooley Cliff, glittering yet stubborn and unyielding, silent and unchangeable. His research, like his character, was equally stubborn and unyielding. In simpler terms, no matter how much time was spent, there was no substantial progress. Someone should be dissatisfied, the now very old Jose O'Kenley murmured. He knew that the academy, using the former dean's recommendation letter, had forced a student onto him as a warning. For 50 years since arriving at the Cyrus Magic Academy, Jose O'Kenley had devoted all his energy to the seemingly hopeless subject of rune logic and calculation, without any results. Once a renowned figure in the rune science world of the Principality of Xian, he had gradually faded from public view. Like a hidden monk in Shaolin Temple, he silently swept the floor, concealing his martial arts skills. The academy had long been dissatisfied with his behavior, and the continuous reduction of the rune department's funding over the years was one sign. Other instructors in the rune department also had their complaints. Everyone hoped he would do the right thing, create rune constructs. If Jose O'Kenley were willing to focus his energy back on rune constructs, it wouldn't take long. Just making that decision would restore the rune department to its former glory. But he remained defiant. I don't have many years left. What I didn't care about when I was young, why would I care now? Jose O'Kenley murmured. He didn't understand why the academy didn't grasp this principle, but he knew he was nearing the end of his life. He had spent so much time and energy, yet his research hadn't yielded any breakthroughs. However, Jose wasn't disappointed. A few decades was insignificant in the history of rune literature. Moreover, what he wanted to do was completely overturn the existing rune literature system that had developed for thousands of years. Decades of effort, and the power of one person, in the face of this great achievement, is as impractical as a grain of sand trying to fill the sea. History has long proven that to achieve disruptive or leapfrog development in a system, either several generations, even a dozen generations, of dedicated and painstaking research are needed, or a groundbreaking figure like Leo Monk who created the Eighth Ring spell emerges. I neither believed nor aspired to be that kind of person. He simply followed his heart, researching what he believed was right, and leaving something behind so that, even after his death, he would leave some data and direction for future generations. However, so many years have passed, and no one has followed him, not even one who agrees with him. Seeing that time is running out, his feelings have subtly changed. If there is not a single companion, or even a single person who understands him, then after his death, perhaps no one will remember his research. At that time, everything he has achieved with his life's energy will probably be seen by others as nothing more than a few utterly absurd lines on a piece of paper. It would be carelessly tossed into some garbage dump in the academy, rotting among putrid food scraps, crawling with worms. The old man sighed softly. He had anticipated this possibility, but there was nothing he could do to prevent it from happening. Lost in thought, he walked to the workbench in the center of the rune workshop. Although the student named Gouda was forcibly assigned to him by the academy as a reminder and discipline, he had always been a very responsible person. Regardless of how this student came to be his student, since he had become his mentor, I would teach him some rune-related knowledge properly. Of course, the prerequisite was that the student was willing to learn and able to learn. He hadn't taken on any students in a long time, and had even forgotten how to teach one. So last night, he had specifically set aside 2 hours to review introductory rune-related books that were almost fading from his memory. Then he compiled some materials for Gouda to help him gain a basic understanding of the profound subject of rune literature in the shortest possible time. However, I glanced at the workbench and didn't find the materials he had prepared last night. He thought about it carefully, then tapped his cane with some annoyance. I'm getting senile. I was so busy coming here for the test this morning that I forgot to bring my materials. I even subconsciously thought I had. Then, I thought of another question. If he didn't bring the materials, what was that freshman named Gouda doing? Did he just leave without even asking him if he saw the materials? I frowned slightly. He could understand Gouda giving up after looking at the materials, but he couldn't accept him leaving without saying goodbye. He sighed again, feeling that it was pointless to dwell on this at a time like this. However, the countless hardships he had endured as a child to learn rune literature made his instinctively reject this kind of behavior that didn't cherish the opportunity to learn. Thinking this, he began to organize the calculation sheets that he had carelessly scattered yesterday. After sorting and classifying them, I closed his handwritten notes, preparing to take them back and rewrite them several times. Perhaps making several copies would ensure that one or two of them wouldn't end up in the trash. The old man thought his idea was a bit ridiculous, but he was genuinely prepared to put it into practice. However, upon picking up his notebook, the old man discovered a piece of draft paper underneath. Did I forget to collect and categorize the calculations I did some time ago? He wondered, his gaze unconsciously falling on the draft paper, on the handwriting that clearly wasn't his. Then, the usually calm old man's pupils dilated for the first time in a long while, and his usually placid eyes suddenly stirred with emotion. Chapter 132: The Foreseeable Future and the Unpredictable Ending. The 6 rules the old man wrote in his notebook were the culmination of his life's research. However, everything ended with a final question: where did the problem lie? Simply put, the 6 fundamental rules of runes had been falsified by the old man himself. A magic circle calculated based on his rules and formulas, capable of being constructed and operated, failed in reality. Why did it fail? Where was the right direction? These were the questions Jose O'Kenley had been pondering and trying to answer for years. He could sense that he was just a thin membrane away from success. But like a naive young man, he lingered at the entrance, unable to find a way in. The old man could feel himself going around in a dead end all these years. Knowing this was one thing, but breaking free from his mental impasse was another. At these moments, the old man desperately hoped for a fellow traveler, perhaps, with someone else's different perspective, he could find a new direction. Unfortunately, this was just wishful thinking. Not to mention companions, he had never even had an advocate standing behind him. Well, not that he'd never had one before, but memories from long ago brought tears to the old man's eyes. He quickly shook his head, banishing those memories, and focused on the manuscript before him. It was just an ordinary piece of paper, but to Jose O'Kenley, a man over 300 years old, it was priceless. For on this very paper, the old man saw for the first time the shadow of a companion. On the paper, God, in passable handwriting, accurately and clearly deduced the examples he had written in his notes, according to his 6 fundamental rules of runes. As God continued reading, a glimmer of light gradually appeared on Jose's aged face. No one had ever accepted his research results, and no one could understand his 6 fundamental rules of runes. But today, there was one. Especially when he saw God simplify his rune formulas with strange, unique, yet concise symbols, and arrive at the theoretically correct answer, a smile of satisfaction appeared on the old man's face. In the past, his eye had never seen any mage accept his unorthodox ideas, deriving a magic circle on paper without relying on personal power, but solely on a few theorems and calculations. Having just conceived the idea that perhaps someone will carry on the legacy, his eye quickly forgot about these concerns. Because he saw something far more shocking. Why did it fail? The formula might be missing an interference constant C, Q equals E and C. In his eye's knowledge system, constant was an extremely unfamiliar neologism. But the instant he saw the terms formula and interference constant, he understood the meaning of constant. The membrane that had troubled the old man for so long was pierced in that instant. Yes, he had long discovered that all magic circles whose formulas were successfully derived but failed in practice shared a common characteristic. The difference between the theoretical robustness value and the actual robustness value always fell within a certain range. And whenever this range was exceeded, it was as if there was a break, meaning the formula's calculations would succeed, and reality would also inevitably succeed. But what exactly was this range, and where did it come from? The old man had never been able to understand. Now, after Gauda's insightful explanation, the old man suddenly understood. Magic circles can be repeated. Different people constructing the same proven unworkable magic circle will inevitably fail, completely unaffected by the individual's rune master level. This means there must be a common factor influencing the success rate. This factor must be what Gauda called the interference constant. Who would have thought that a freshman who had never touched runeology could so easily solve the problem that had troubled Jose, the chief rune master of Sayre's Academy, for years? The old man's tangled thoughts were finally cleared up. Although Jose O'Kenley knew that knowing the formula's flaws didn't mean all the problems were solved. Deriving the specific value of this interference constant would require a lot of time, effort, and methods. But most importantly, the most difficult stage of thinking had been overcome. What remained was just hard work. The perfection of the rune formula was only a matter of time. Because he understood the significance of perfecting the rune formula, Jose O'Kenley stood there, speechless for a long time. Could it really be done? At the brink of success, the old man, who had always been solely focused on his own work, felt a sense of dread for the first time. He was terrified that he would ultimately discover that the so-called rune formula was nothing but a figment of his imagination, utter nonsense. Jose O'Kenley closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Finally, he opened his eyes again, picked up the manuscript left by God, and went back into the small inner room. The weariness on the old man's face had completely vanished. After leaving Gavin Tower, which belonged to the rune department, God first returned to Building 30 in Zone 1, filled his water bag with leak-free water, and then headed to the training building. He had no idea what kind of inspiration the formula and the sentence he left on the manuscript would bring to his mentor, or what kind of shock it would cause to the entire rune system. All God now realized was that if he didn't seize the time to train while the effects of leak-free water were still present, he would regret it. At the training building, God swiped his identity badge at the reception desk and spent 1 gold to rent a first-tier training room for 4 hours. In fact, most mages, limited by their energy and mental strength, can only practice guided spells for about 2 hours a day. Therefore, the rental fee for the cultivation room is based on 2 hours. However, after drinking the water of no leakage, the daily cultivation time can be extended by half an hour. So Gauda chose to extend the time. But there's no need to worry about wasting it. According to the rules of the cultivation building, if the rented cultivation room time isn't used up at once, the remaining time won't be cleared but will be recorded and saved for future use. Cultivation room 11 on the 4th floor. After paying, the receptionist handed Gauda his identity badge and told him the cultivation room number. Gauda thanked her and went up to the 4th floor, Entering his rented cultivation room, number 11. He activated the magic node array in the cultivation room again using his identity badge. Then, Gata watched as the magic concentration displayed on the magic detector rose from 3 to 48 and then stabilized. Knowing the time had come, Gata didn't hesitate any longer. He immediately sat cross-legged, quickly entered a meditative state, and began circulating the apprentice guiding technique, guiding magic power into his body. Compared to the basic training room, the first-tier training room, with a magic power concentration as high as 48, provided a much greater boost to the mage apprentice's cultivation. Gata could sense that the stardust representing magic power around him had become so dense that it had gathered into clusters of stars. Each time he guided magic power into his body, he was drawing out clusters of stars, not individual stardust. The efficiency was simply unimaginable. Nearly 2 hours later, Gata opened his eyes after completing one round of the cultivation process, his gaze slightly weary. This meant that his cultivation time for the day had reached its limit. Continuing would be a waste of time. However, Gata did not end his cultivation there. He untied the water pouch tied to his waist and opened the stopper. A peculiar and ethereal fragrance wafted out. He put the water pouch to his lips and gulped down several large mouthfuls. Gata felt refreshed, and the fatigue from cultivation was greatly dispelled. Having already witnessed a miraculous power of the leak-free water, Gata didn't waste any more time marveling at it, but instead entered a meditative state once more. Another half-hour later, Gata finally finished his cultivation for the day. One session of cultivation in the first-tier cultivation room was equivalent to 4 sessions of naked cultivation. This efficiency was already 80% of drinking a basic magic potion, Gata secretly calculated in his mind. Of course, the effect of the first-tier cultivation room assisting cultivation was still different from directly drinking magic potions. After all, the former only increased the magic concentration in the environment, and one still had to guide the magic into the body. The latter, however, could directly generate magic in the body after drinking, eliminating the guiding into the body step. But was the first-tier cultivation room inferior to a basic magic potion? Not at all. The former only cost 10 silver coins per session, while the latter cost 2 gold coins. A 4-fold cost difference, but only a 20% difference in efficiency. In terms of cost-effectiveness, the first-tier cultivation room was the clear winner. After drinking the leak-free water, I can cultivate the guided spell for an extra half-hour for free. With the extra half-hour, 1 cultivation session is almost equivalent to 6 naked cultivation sessions, Gata murmured. If he could use the combination of leak-free water and level 1 cultivation room every day, his cultivation speed would surpass that of drinking basic magic potions. It's just a pity that the leak-free water is a one-time use item. After returning, I'll drink all the remaining leak-free water and see how many days its effects last, Gata secretly decided. Waste is out of the question. Chapter 133 Jericho and the Opportunity. Because of the significant reduction in hunger after drinking the water of no leakage, Gata hadn't even eaten breakfast today. However, no matter how miraculous the water of no leakage was, it couldn't allow him to fast. After a busy morning, Gata was still quite hungry. 91 gold and 6 silver coins, his savings were already running low. He couldn't afford to spend too much money on food now, he'd just eat something to fill his stomach. Gata told himself this on his way to the academy restaurant. Half an hour later, at the restaurant entrance, Gata glanced at the signboard as he stepped inside. It listed the restaurant's special dishes for the day. Today's special, vulture rice, 10 silver coin serving. 5 minutes later. Sir, your vulture rice, carefully prepared, please enjoy. The restaurant staff brought a mysterious dish called vulture rice to Gata's table. He really couldn't spend too much money on food. But this was of vulture. He'd barely seen one, let alone eaten one. While mentally justifying himself, Gata observed the extremely bizarre dish. The so-called eagle stuffed rice was actually similar to chicken stuffed rice from his previous life. Both involved stuffing a staple food into the belly of a bird and cooking it together. The only difference was that this dish used an eagle. And instead of white rice, it contained whole wheat and saffron, then covered with a spicy seasoning similar to chili peppers. Gata took a deep breath and first scooped up a spoonful of the soft, sweet, steamed wheat from the eagle's belly and put it in his mouth. The sweetness of the wheat, the fragrance of the saffron, the spiciness of the seasoning, and the indescribable meaty aroma of the eagle itself intertwined, instantly giving Gata's taste buds an unprecedented experience. You're something else, Gata exclaimed fiercely to the restaurant chef, while also admitting his wallet had shrunk even further. After lunch, Gata's next destination was the Academy's library. Actually, he had wanted to go for a long time. However, until he completed his enrollment mission, he wasn't considered a formal student of the Academy. Those who aren't official students can't enjoy the privileges afforded to students, including borrowing books from the library. The Library of Sears Academy is an ancient stone building, one of the Academy's oldest structures, with over 1,000 years of history. After thousands of years of accumulation, it's said that the library now houses over 8,000 books. This number might not sound like much, after all, in my previous life, even an ordinary middle school library could have tens or even hundreds of thousands of books. But in this world, books are truly a luxury, not a daily necessity. A library with over 8,000 books is unparalleled in the entire Duchy of Sienne. Stepping through the library's doors, an atmosphere befitting a library immediately envelopes you. The library has only 2 floors, and with Gata's privileges, the books on the first floor are free for him. Gata's gaze swept over the books displayed on the first floor shelves. These books ranged from ancient parchment scrolls to exquisite hardcover editions, all clearly possessing a rich historical charm. As committee member Lal had explained, while most books in the library were free for Gata, they were mostly general books or collections of previous scholars' experiences and theories. Truly valuable knowledge, even for students, required payment and couldn't be borrowed for free. It might seem that Sears Academy was stingy with its students, but that wasn't actually the case. In this world, due to knowledge monopolies, high-ranking mages or powerful factions who possessed knowledge kept it tightly hidden, making it inaccessible to ordinary people, even with money. Being able to pay for knowledge was often a tremendous benefit. Gata didn't think too much about it. Even those general books were extremely valuable to him. He never denied his country bumpkin status. As a student admitted with the highest privileges, Gata enjoyed the privilege of borrowing up to 10 books and a handwritten copy of a collection of previous scholars' experiences and theories for free at a time. Furthermore, the borrowing period was extended from half a month for ordinary students to 2 months. He didn't hesitate to use his privileges. After some selection, he chose 10 books covering various fields, including history and law books of the Principality of Sienne, as well as general books on finance, agriculture, etiquette, and other areas, a general history of Sienne, a compilation of laws of the Principality of Sienne, a comprehensive overview of humanities in Sienne, etiquette and social norms, and agriculture and weather. Finally, Gata also saw an article titled Some Speculations on the Awakening of Expertise written by Bjernotero, which seemed to be his graduation project paper. Regardless of who this Bjernotero was, or whether the article contained any real substance, at least the title caught Gata's attention. Therefore, he gave it his quota for borrowing handwritten copies of previous scholars' experience and theories. After swiping his ID badge and borrowing the thick stack of books from the library, Gata hurried to his dormitory. He needed to put these books back in Building 30 of Section 1 first. Because if the books borrowed from the library were lost or damaged, he would have to pay for them. In this world, even general-purpose books cost an average of 2 gold coins or more. Surprisingly, Gata bumped into Jerica on the road outside Building 30. Jerica, who, like him, entered the academy with the highest level of privilege, also had her dormitory in Zone 1. However, because Gata and Jerica chose different paths during their entrance quests and their times were different, they had never met in Zone 1. Yet today, they unexpectedly bumped into each other here. After the provocation by Rigri Harrell in the restaurant half a month ago, Gata gradually understood what highest level of privilege meant at Cyrus Academy. Compared to his highest level of privilege, which he obtained purely through a letter of recommendation, Jerica's highest level of privilege, while partly due to her connections, was mostly due to her own abilities. From this, Gata understood just how outstanding Jerica's magical talent was. Leaving aside other factors, the fact that she had already reached the level of a third-grade mage apprentice 3 years ago at the age of 13 was enough to glimpse her exceptional abilities. He was only 13 years old, still struggling at the second-tier mage apprentice level. Looking at the exhausted Jerica, God knew she had just returned from Creeper Cliff. Aside from him, who had broken records with his clam harvesting technique, the other 5 freshmen were still toiling away at mining, less than halfway through. After a moment's hesitation, God took the initiative to greet her. No matter what, he still owed Jerica a favor, and it wouldn't be right to ignore her now that they met. This was their first time meeting alone. Jerica's eyes flickered as she greeted God, lost in thought. "Should I call you Master Google, or God?" she asked casually. "Haven't you been holding it in for a while?" God found it somewhat amusing. During their first meeting at Creeper Cliff, he had noticed Jerica's confusion about his presence at Cyrus Academy and the name God. God had planned to tell her the truth if she asked. But Jerica stubbornly kept quiet, never asking God that directly, as if she didn't know him at all. "I'm sorry, I offended some people and was worried about retaliation, so I had to use a pseudonym in Bremen," Gaudette explained. "Now that I've left Bremen, I don't have to worry about that anymore, so I'm using my real name again. I didn't mean to deceive you, Miss Jerica," he apologized sincerely. HMPH, Jerica snorted, letting the matter drop. It wasn't a big deal, and with Gaudette's attitude, she naturally didn't care. "I didn't realize you had such superb repair skills and a unique method for harvesting oysters," Jerica said, her tone a mixture of praise, frustration, and envy. Clearly, the introductory task was causing her considerable trouble. "How far along are you in your introductory task, Miss Jerica?" Since the topic had come up, Gaudette casually asked. "Less than 1,300 kilograms, Jerica looked even more exhausted at this. "Why?" Gaudette asked, puzzled. Since the task wasn't finished yet, and it was only past noon, why was Jerica stopping work early? "I'm tired," Jerica said expressionlessly. Although, given her family background, she had been constantly using stamina-restoring potions these past few days, these potions only restored physical strength. The mental fatigue from repeating the same mining day after day was something potions couldn't restore. A proper balance of work and rest was undoubtedly necessary. Being too tense would eventually drive her crazy. God's mind raced, and he realized what Jerica meant by tired. He felt slightly embarrassed. Compared to the monotonous mining, the rewarding activity of clam harvesting clearly brought him far less fatigue. Therefore, throughout the entire entrance mission, God's spirits had been high. He was only physically exhausted. He couldn't empathize with Jerica because he hadn't even mined a single ore. Moreover, he was powerless to help Jerica with the entrance mission. The Academy had clearly stipulated that no outside help could be used in the entrance mission. Wait a minute. Lost in thought, God suddenly remembered something. "Miss Jerica, wait here for me a moment," he said. God didn't bother to explain, unlocked the door to Building 30, and strode inside. A moment later, he emerged, carrying a small tin kettle. "Here," God handed the kettle to Jerica. "What's this?" Jerica took the kettle, her brow furrowing. "A good thing, drinking it will relieve fatigue," God smiled. Jerica opened the kettle lid with slight suspicion, then sniffed, already smelling the peculiar fragrance. Leak-free water, such a pleasant scent, even she had never smelled anything like it. Was it some kind of unique drink? After a slight hesitation, a faint, almost imperceptible glint flashed in Jerica's eyes, detecting toxicity. Confirming it was non-toxic, Jerica brought the kettle to her lips and took a small, perfunctory sip. That one sip made her beautiful eyes light up instantly. She had never tasted anything so delicious before. So, Jerica, who had only intended to take a small sip, ended up drinking the entire pitcher of leak-free water in one gulp. Looking at the empty tin pitcher, Jerica felt slightly embarrassed. This behavior was hardly ladylike. "It tastes very good," she said, masking her embarrassment with a compliment. Gotti smiled slightly. "It's not just the taste that's good." He didn't say anything more. It was better for Jerica to experience the specific effects of the leak-free water firsthand later, rather than him saying more. Chapter 134 The Flaws in the Water-Making Technique. After Jerica returned the tin kettle to God, the two parted ways. Although she found the leak-proof water God had given her delicious, Jerica didn't think much of it. However, just a few minutes after returning to her room, Jerica suddenly realized that despite not having drunk any stamina-restoring potions, her stamina had inexplicably recovered significantly. And it wasn't just stamina, a new vitality was surging through her body. Jerica, exhausted both physically and mentally from mining, felt like she had been parched and nourished by rain. What was happening? Inside her room, God had just opened some speculations on faction awakening when the sudden doorbell rang, drawing his attention. Puzzled, God opened the door, only to find that it was Jerica, whom he had just parted ways with, who had come to visit. "Miss Jerica, is there something you need? What was that you just gave me to drink? Is there any more? Or where can I buy some?" Jerica asked, her eyes fixed intently on God. The feeling of physical and mental exhaustion being dispelled after drinking the leak-free water had left a deep impression on Jerica. Therefore, she couldn't wait a moment longer and immediately came to buy more. She had experienced the miraculous effects of the leak-free water and wanted to buy some for backup. I'd like to sell it, but I can't. Meanwhile, Gwen's thoughts raced. This is something I brewed myself according to a family secret recipe. The ingredients are precious, and the process is complicated and time-consuming, so I don't make many. There's still some left. If you want some, I can give you a little more, he said. However, Gwen preemptively, it can't be preserved in the usual way. Once it's made, it will evaporate within a day. You'd better drink it immediately, Jerica nodded understandingly. Such a special item should be precious and rare. Wait a moment. After saying this, Gada quickly went upstairs, took out the tin kettle he had brought earlier, and filled it with about half a pint of leak-free water. This amount would be gone in a few sips, and wouldn't be left until the time limit for Water Creation Plus expired at night, causing the remaining leak-free water to disappear into thin air. Otherwise, even with his prior warning, such a phenomenon would still be very suspicious. Gouda handed the tin kettle to Jerica, and he could clearly see that Jerica's eyes lit up. Its taste is indeed very special, like a fruit drink, but it tastes better than any fruit drink I've ever had, not to mention its wonderful uses. Jerica couldn't help but praise the leak-free water again. She took out her purse, ready to pay. Gouda quickly waved his hand and said generously, no need, this is just a small gift for you. How could I accept your money? Jerica's upbringing made her unwilling to accept things from others for free. Normally, if someone refused to accept her money, she would rather not take the item. But this time, she hesitated for a moment, then finally chose to take back the purse, softly saying, thank you. After seeing Jerica off again and closing the door, God, slowly climbing the stairs, suddenly stopped. Fruit drink. He thought of Jerica's description of leak-free water. It was this description that suddenly opened God's mind. If this water is not consumed, it will disappear after 1 day. This was the limitation of a zero-level spell, Water Creation. Before this, God had subconsciously understood it as, if the water created by Water Creation was not drunk within a day, it would disappear naturally. Now, thinking about it carefully, perhaps he shouldn't so simply and crudely interpret consumption as drinking. For example, if water is added to flour to knead dough, and this water is not drunk, is it considered consumed? Most likely it is. It can't be that the originally moist bread suddenly loses its moisture and becomes dry flour again after 1 day, can it? Following this line of thought, there should actually be ways to preserve the leak-free water created by Water Creation Plus, bypassing its 1-day expiration date. For example, brewing fruit drinks. The ingredients for fruit drinks are fruit and water. Mixing fruit and water, fermenting, and flavoring yields the drink. Using the liquid from Water Creation Plus to brew fruit drinks is equivalent to consuming it, isn't it? Wouldn't this be another strange way to circumvent the 1-day shelf life limit of Water Creation liquid? Once the idea surfaced in his mind, Gada couldn't sit still any longer. If he didn't hurry, the leak-free water would expire. He immediately grabbed his key and left the room again. Young people are always decisive and efficient. He first went to the Academy's trading area and bought several kinds of fresh seasonal fruit and some yeast for brewing fruit drinks. He also bought several exquisite small ceramic jars. The total cost was only 7 silver coins. Prices within the Academy were quite reasonable. After buying the necessary materials, Gouda hurried back to Building 30 in Zone 1. He first opened the large earthenware jar containing the leak-free water and glanced at it. Of the 2 gallons, approximately 9.6 liters, of leak-free water he had initially drunk in large quantities to avoid waste, only about 1 gallon remained. Gouda was somewhat amused and exasperated. However, 1 gallon was still a considerable amount. Not daring to waste any more time, Gouda immediately got to work. He washed the various fresh, seasonal fruits he had bought, peeled and pitted the rest, then chopped them and placed them separately into several earthenware jars. Next, Gouda evenly poured the remaining gallon of leak-free water into the jars containing the different fruit pieces. He then added an appropriate amount of yeast and stirred it well. Normally, brewing fruit drinks requires adding honey, sugar, and other flavorings to adjust the flavor. But Gouda added nothing except the fruit. Firstly, the flavor of the leak-free water itself was already unique enough, and there was no need to add anything superfluous. Secondly, he worried that adding too many seasonings, while preserving the leak-free water, would also alter its efficacy. Undoubtedly, the fewer seasonings added during the brewing of fruit drinks with leak-free water, the greater the likelihood of retaining the leak-free water and its efficacy. This is why Gutta chose a variety of different fruits. He wasn't sure if the added fruits would change the efficacy of the leak-free water, making several different sets of fruit drinks. Surely one fruit would have the least impact on the efficacy of the leak-free water? After completing all this, Gutta covered the earthenware jar, leaving a small gap, and waited for it to ferment. I'll check again tonight. If the liquid in the jar is still there and hasn't disappeared by then, it means my idea is correct. Chapter 135 Goal, Superior Feat. A speculation on faction awakening. Abstract. As we all know, feats have always been powerful tools for mages in combat, training, and even daily life. From changing the world to producing a small horseshoe, feats can be applied. With the help of feats, mages can often do things that other mages cannot do or even imagine. It is one of the important components that distinguishes each mage's uniqueness. However, due to the unpredictability and uncontrollability of feat awakening a powerful feat in the desired direction during ring ascension is quite difficult and complex. This article will first introduce some current consensus among mages regarding feat awakening, and then, through extensive research and analysis, introduce a new speculation on feat awakening, the influence of mastering the number of spells on feat awakening. This leads to a bolder method of controlling feat awakening. Keywords: feat awakening, number of spells. Introduction. Is feat awakening really unpredictable or uncontrollable? Obviously not absolutely. We all know that if a mage hasn't mastered any damaging spells, they're unlikely to awaken a combat feat. A mage exceptionally skilled in potions, alchemy, or even runic arts will likely awaken a support feat in that area. In short, predecessors have summarized many patterns regarding feat awakening, which I won't elaborate on here. Awakening a more powerful feat has always been something many mages strive for but fail to achieve. In this regard, the experience given by predecessors is, the more spells one masters, the deeper one's knowledge, and the stronger one's mana and spirit, the higher the probability of awakening a powerful feat of a certain type. This is a rather vague experience, essentially saying that if you excel in everything, your awakened feat will naturally be more powerful. This might be true, but it's also useless. Every mage has limited energy and time, making it impossible to excel in everything. Therefore, analyzing which factor has the greatest impact on the strength of awakened feats is truly practical. After reviewing a large amount of material, I discovered a fact: genius mages often awaken more powerful feats. This is not a coincidence. There must be an inherent, constant factor influencing the strength of the awakened feat. What do genius mages have in common? Spells. Rapid progress in cultivation and vast knowledge do not necessarily make one a genius mage, but a genius mage will learn spells extremely quickly. For them, constructing spell models is much simpler. This is a talent, a mage's talent. Therefore, genius mages master far more spells than ordinary mages. Could it be understood that the number of spells a mage masters has a significant positive impact on the strength of their awakened feat? Analysis. Since one of the 3 rules of mages is never let anyone know your spells, exploring a mage's spell library has always been a major taboo. This presents a significant challenge to verifying this hypothesis. Fortunately, this hypothesis about feat awakening only requires the number of spells a mage masters, not the specific spells. Furthermore, what's needed is only the number of spells a mage mastered when they ascended to the first level of their specialization, not the number of spells they currently possess, which further reduces the difficulty of verification. However, specializations are even more closely guarded secrets for mages than spells. Therefore, we cannot know the specific strength of each mage's awakened specialization. We can only conduct a simple analysis based on consensus. After some difficult exploration, we obtained 11 case studies for analysis. The sample size is somewhat small, but that's all we can do, and we can only analyze first-level specializations. The first case study is my mentor, Arya George. As is well known, Arya George, as one of the spellcasting mentors, awakened the combat specialization when he ascended to the first level of magehood. Although the specific effects are unknown, this combat specialization did indeed make Arya George quickly become one of the most powerful mages among his cohort. Based on this performance, I tentatively classify his awakened combat specialization as Tier 2. Let's tentatively divide specialization strength into 5 levels: Super I, II, and IV. Elijah George had 21 spells at the time of awakening his first level feat. Jesse Bites had 14 spells at level 3 feat strength. Karias had 12 spells at level 3 feat strength. Bet Fleming had 17 spells at level 3 feat strength. Florydale had 22 spells at level 2 feat strength. Since all the above samples were taken from instructors or students within the Academy, and the Academy's mages generally awaken feats starting at level 3, lacking extreme examples for reference, I obtained 2 additional samples. Nezel Ferrari, a first-level mage who started as a wild mage and has not received formal mage training, is currently a potion maker. His first-level feat strength is level 4, and he had 9 spells at the time of awakening his first-level feat. Ronan Hori, the first headmaster of Cyrus Academy, is known for his exceptional talent even as a first-ring mage. His first-ring feat, a combat feat that increases spell power, is likely classified as a first-class feat. Furthermore, according to later accounts, he probably mastered more than 30 spells during his apprenticeship. Therefore, we can infer that the strength of a mage's awakened feat is greatly influenced by the number of spells they possess. In the current design, when awakening a first-ring feat, if the number of spells mastered is less than 10, the feat's strength is 4th class. Between 10 and 20 spells, it's 3rd class. Between 20 and 25 or 20 and 30 spells, it's 2nd class. Above 25 or 30 spells, the feat reaches 1st class strength. Due to the lack of a sample of superior feats, no inferences can be drawn. However, I make a bold hypothesis: to awaken a level 1 feat to superior strength, one needs to master more than 35 spells before advancing to the next level. Summary and outlook: due to the limited sample size, this derivation has many limitations, and many inferences are merely speculations. However, I believe that as the demand for improving awakened feat strength among mages increases, and as research deepens and more mages are willing to provide information samples, the hypothesis regarding the impact of the number of spells mastered on the strength of awakened feats will inevitably be verified more accurately. Regardless of the accuracy of the data in this hypothesis, it is at least certain that the more spells mastered, the higher the strength of the awakened feat. Currently, there are approximately 50 spells, at most 60, including rare spells. To awaken a superior feat, the requirement is more than 35 spells, which means mastering more than 70% of spells during the mage apprenticeship stage. However, even the most talented mage, during their apprenticeship, would need at least 2 to 3 months to construct a spell model for a magic trick. Therefore, achieving this requires extremely high levels of time, energy, talent, and even mindset, making it virtually impossible. But I still hope that one day, a mage in this academy will master more than 35 spells during their apprenticeship, to verify the final point of my conjecture. Acknowledgements. Gauda intently read Bjorno Taro's conjecture on the awakening of specializations. Sure enough, any documentary material recognized by the academy and placed in the library couldn't be without substance, he thought to himself. He'd struck gold. Discovering this graduation project was absolutely a stroke of luck for Gauda, because he was very likely the only person in Seer's Academy, and even the entire Principality of Sienne, with the means to verify Bjorno Taro's conjecture about super specializations. Even the most gifted mage, at the apprentice level, would need at least 2 to 3 months to construct a spell model for a single trick. This is assuming a 3rd-tier apprenticeship. Below that level, the time required to construct a spell model would be even longer. In other words, to master more than 35 tricks at the apprenticeship stage, normally even a genius mage, even if they only begin learning spells at peak efficiency at the 3rd-tier apprenticeship, would need 6 to 9 years. And the golden age for advancing to 1st-tier mage is before the age of 20. No one would miss this golden age for the sake of this merely hypothetical superpower, but Gauda is different. He only needs about 10 days to construct a spell model for a single trick. What limits Gauda is simply how to obtain 35 spell recipes. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136: Making Money. Making money. 0 spell recipe costs an average of 6 gold coins. Gauda currently knows 19 spells, 16 short of 35. This means you'll need at least 96 gold coins just to buy spell recipes. And that's the minimum price. The higher the level, the harder it is to acquire spell recipes for spells he hasn't mastered, and the more money it will cost. Furthermore, spell recipes are divided into common and rare levels. Rare spell recipes are not only difficult to buy with money, but they are also usually much more expensive than common ones. Therefore, if Gauda wants to expand his spell repertoire to 35 or higher before advancing to first level mage, he needs to prepare at least 100 gold coins. His current savings are 90 gold and 19 silver, already below the 100 gold mark and steadily decreasing. While the academy doesn't charge rent, he still has to pay for food. Additionally, renting a level 1 training room costs 10 silver for 2 hours. If the leak-free water can truly be preserved, under its blessing, Gauda's daily rent for the training room will extend to 2.5 hours. The corresponding expenditure will increase to 12.5 silver. This can be considered a fixed daily expense. Furthermore, elective courses will require substantial tuition fees in the future. This is another foreseeable major expense. Money. This calculation immediately brought a deep sense of crisis regarding a fiscal deficit to Gauda's mind. Finding a stable way to make money suddenly became urgent. Potions? Without his own herb garden to reduce raw material costs, the profit from concocting zero-tier potions would be too low, just hard-earned money. Not considered. Returning to his old profession as a repair craftsman? This requires no cost and is 100% profitable. However, even in an environment like Seer's Academy where everyone is a mage, the total amount of damaged magical items needing repair wouldn't be too large. Therefore, this is a way to make money, but it's not stable, more like a one-off deal. Moreover, attracting business was also a problem. Those who live near the mountains live off the mountains, those who live near the sea live off the sea. After some screening, Gauda realized that, under the current circumstances, the most practical way to make money was to work for the academy, taking on tasks provided by the academy's logistics department. And to be honest, he was quite curious about what kind of tasks the academy would provide. Thinking of the logistics department, Gauda suddenly remembered something else. He hadn't paid the 5 silver coin monthly maintenance fee for his dormitory. If he delayed any longer, he might be put on the academy's debt defaulter list. He couldn't afford to lose face like that. This trip to the logistics department was now unavoidable. Logistics department, finance office. Gauda handed his ID badge and the 3 gold coins he had prepared to the old scholar in the Seer's Academy uniform in the office. He planned to take advantage of his current financial situation to prepay a year's maintenance fee. Gauda, pay the 1-year maintenance fee for Building 30 in Zone 1, a total of 3 gold coins. The old scholar took out his things, writing them down while confirming with Gauda again. After a brief pause, he handed Gauda his ID badge and a receipt stamped with a finance department's seal. Thank you, Gauda, whose deposit had been reduced by 3 gold, took the items and left the finance department, heading straight for the mission hall on the first floor of the logistics department. This was his true destination. Compared to the committee's course selection hall, the logistics department's mission hall was much busier, with 3 counters open simultaneously. 2 counters were for students to accept missions. The 3rd counter was for recording needs and posting missions. The missions posted in the mission hall, apart from a small portion issued by the academy, were mostly from instructors and even students within the academy. The mission notice board is up there. Look at it first, and then go to the counter to accept the mission if you find one you like, a young female staff member in the hall said to Gauda, pointing to the huge display screen hanging above the counter. The display screen displayed in real time the missions that had not yet been accepted. Of course, there were no electronic screens in this world. The display screen was actually an alchemy machine. Alchemists' employment broadly falls into 2 categories, creating extraordinary items and crafting alchemical machines. While the former carries the word extraordinary, sounding more prestigious, the latter's prospects and financial rewards are no less impressive. The value of these 2 paths is equally high. To illustrate why they are considered equal, consider this: airships are, in fact, a type of alchemical machine. Gauda stopped before the massive quest notice board and carefully reviewed it. River patrol and hunt Leeline creatures in the Naga River below Creeper Cliff. This quest runs in 7-day cycles. Accepting this quest requires completing at least 1 cycle, with daily patrol time not less than 5 hours. Completing this quest rewards 35 gold coins, with additional rewards for hunting leeline creatures of level 0 or higher. This quest requires a minimum mage level of 1, plant care, care for potions garden number 5, primarily vermilion grass, Vera aloe, and crimson 9 root. The task cycle is 90 days. During the task cycle, the damage rate of magical plants in the herb garden must not exceed 50%, the good quality rate must not be lower than 90%, and the magical plants must grow well. Completing the task will earn you 27 gold. Requirements for applying to accept this task: you must have completed the magical plant cultivation course under the Potion of Magic branch, magic array maintenance and repair, inspect and maintain the magic arrays and barrier facilities in the Academy's student living area, mainly small cleaning magic arrays, small soundproof barriers, small alarm barriers, and small temperature regulation barriers. The task cycle is half an academic year. You must ensure that the repair and maintenance of faults reported by students are completed within 2 working days. Completing the task will earn you 36 gold. This task requires completion of at least the 3rd stage of the Runeology course, book repair. Go to the Academy's library and assist in repairing damaged books. The task cycle is 1 month. During this period, you must devote at least 3 hours of work time each day and repair at least 3 ancient books. Completing the task will earn you 20 gold coins and special borrowing rights for some books in the library. This task requires. The tasks posted at the top of the task bulletin board are all issued by the Academy. The rewards are actually quite considerable. However, they either have requirements regarding the mage's level or the student's academic level, requiring completion of specific courses before applying to accept the task. Gata looked at more than a dozen task announcements and found that none of them were suitable for him. Of course, it wasn't the so-called you need work experience to work, and you need work experience to gain work experience dilemma. It was probably that the simple tasks with no requirements had already been snatched up by other students. Gata continued to look down. After the Academy's tasks, the tasks posted below were those posted by the Academy's instructors and students. The content and requirements of these tasks became quite varied. Chapter 137: Poisonous Insect Cultivation. Spell Combat Training Partner. Serve as a spell combat training partner to improve your spellcasting skills. Payment is per session, 2 gold per session. Requirements: Mage level 3 apprentice or above. Proficient in and able to use more than 5 combat spells. Fire lizard care, help care for a fire lizard, a 1st level leeline creature. Responsible for feeding it once a day and accompanying it on outings. Payment: 15 gold per month. Requirements: Fire lizards are energetic and have a high activity level. The applicant must have excellent physical strength. Alchemy machine trial. Trial the alchemy machine I created, the Sound Weaver. This machine was created to capture and weave sounds from nature and daily life. Your task is to record over 100 unique sounds for this machine. The task lasts 1 week. Payment is 2 gold, plus priority access to future optimization tasks for this machine. Additional rewards will be given for suggestions that are adopted. No requirements for accepting this task. Care for moonroot grass. Help care for 20 special moonroot grasses. Note, these 20 moonroot grasses are part of my graduation project. Those lacking a sense of responsibility should not accept this task. Failure to complete the task will affect my graduation project and I will be required to compensate. Compared to the tasks issued by the Academy, these tasks issued by instructors and students are undoubtedly much more rewarding. Moreover, some tasks have rewards that are completely disproportionate to their difficulty, seemingly like free money. For example, the Alchemy Machine Trial task. Recording 100 sounds in a week is completely effortless and requires little effort. However, the reward is 2 gold. Isn't that just free money? But that's normal. After all, there are many students from 2nd-generation mages in Seer's Academy. These people are not short of money and certainly don't lack people to be suckers. Moreover, alchemists themselves are rich. Of course, with free money, there are also many pitfalls. Just like the first, spell combat training task, it looks easy and the reward is relatively high. However, spellcasting combat carries the risk of injury, and the mission requirements made no mention of how to ensure safety during sparring or any compensation plan for injuries. Furthermore, combat spells are among the most secretive spells in a mage's arsenal. Exposing everything for a mere 2 gold coin reward isn't worth it. Undoubtedly, this mission is a trap. Whether it's a windfall or a trap is up to the student to decide. If they get scammed, they generally have no choice but to accept their bad luck. Just as Gauda's thoughts were racing, the words on the mission notice board suddenly jumped. The alchemy machine trial mission had disappeared from the notice board. Then Gauda saw an older student taking a machine resembling a music box from the receptionist. Clearly, the trial mission had been accepted by this older student. This annoyed Gauda. He had also taken a liking to this mission. In the blink of an eye, it had fallen into his lap. While still subconsciously browsing the missions, Gauda suddenly noticed this mission on the notice board: poisonous insect cultivation, care for 3 types of poisonous insect eggs cultivated by me. These insects possess unique characteristics and potential magical value. The quest taker must ensure successful hatching and, as instructed, promptly process any defective insects after hatching, selecting only the viable ones. Note, the 3 insect eggs are not ordinary poisonous insects. 2 are eggs of the zero-ring Leline creatures Fire Kiss Ant and Scorpion, while the remaining 1 is the offspring of a hybrid of the one-ring Leline creatures Phantom Centipede and Thorn Centipede, even newly hatched. All 3 insects possess a certain degree of toxicity. Care must be taken during cultivation to avoid contact with the toxins. No compensation will be provided for accidental poisoning. Furthermore, the quest taker must master and skillfully use the spell, Detect Toxicity, to regularly monitor the insect eggs for toxicity to predict hatching time. Those with a fear of poisonous insects should not accept this quest to avoid adverse effects on their physical and mental health. Reward: upon completion, you will receive a rare zero-ring spell recipe, Insect Swarm Growth. Upon reading the task description and rewards, Gauda's eyes lit up with excitement. He needed to promptly deal with the defective products. Dealing with essentially meant killing them. According to the description, there were 3 types of poisonous insects, 2 were zero-ring ley-line creatures, and 1 was a one-ring ley-line creature. Since they were ley-line creatures, killing them would allow Wind Spirit Moonshadow to obtain their corresponding essence. One-ring ley-line creatures were powerful, but how powerful could newly hatched larvae be? Even a newborn lion is easily manipulated. This meant that Gauda could collect 2 zero-ring essence points and 1 one-ring essence point through this task. Yes, a one-ring essence point, something he wouldn't normally even dare to dream of. As for the task rewards, while not the most tangible form of money, a rare spell recipe was far more valuable to Gauda, who was already aiming for a superior feat. After all, rare spell recipes weren't something money could easily acquire. How often can you get both the essence and a rare spell recipe? And he just happens to possess the poison detection skill, meeting the requirements for accepting the quest. Gauda dared not delay any longer. Missing this quest would be heartbreaking. He immediately ran to the quest counter, submitted his identity badge, and formally applied to accept the poisonous insect cultivation quest. Hearing that Gauda was going to accept the quest, the staff at the counter explained in detail what wasn't listed on the quest notice board. This quest was issued by Instructor Shua of the Potions Department. He has been dedicated to researching the fusion of Leline toxins and potions, and is also an outstanding insect master. Insect mastery, such an obscure profession? Gauda thought instinctively. Also, the swarm insect spell effect temporarily causes a swarm of insects, including mites, fleas, and parasites, to appear on the target. This attack method is advantageous because it's unpredictable and strange, but the damage isn't actually outstanding. Although the damage isn't significant, summoning insects on the target can inflict mental damage, which is doubled if the target is female. Gauda thought to himself. Furthermore, I must remind you that although the mission rewards look tempting, this mission is not easy. You need to take care of a considerable number of venomous insect eggs, and their growth cycle is quite long, so completing this mission may take 1 to 2 months. The more the merrier, otherwise, how will I gather the essence? This weakness is actually an advantage for Gauda. Such a long time only yields spell recipes that can't be immediately converted into profits, which makes this mission unpopular. Those who usually accept missions from the logistics department are ordinary commoner mages. They need to complete missions to earn monetary rewards to pay for courses, thereby earning credits by completing the courses. One reward was a spell recipe quest, which naturally wasn't as popular in this situation. It wasn't that rare spell recipes were bad, but the primary task for students in the academy was still credits. Rare spell recipes were more of a bonus. Like when you're truly thirsty, it's not that milk tea is bad, but pure water is what truly quenches thirst. Milk tea is only chosen when enjoying something. Are you sure you still want to apply for this quest? After explaining the details and precautions, the staff member confirmed again. Of course, I'm sure, Gouda replied without hesitation. Although he had already sensed the foreseeable financial crisis, he still had some savings, allowing him to indulge a little. The staff member was somewhat taken aback by Gouda's decisiveness, but said nothing more, and began registering him, then handed him a voucher representing his acceptance of the quest. Take this voucher and go to Instructor Shaw in the potions department. He will assign you the quest. Okay, Gouda took the voucher, turned and left the logistics department, heading to Larry's building, where the potions department was located. Compared to the deserted Gavin's Tower, the rune-wielding faction's Larry Tower was far more bustling. This was because, although rune masters were considered the most powerful of the three starter families, their numbers remained extremely small due to the high barrier to entry. Potions masters, on the other hand, were always the most numerous among the three starter families. Upon entering Larry Tower, God quickly found Instructor Shaw. After God explained his purpose, Instructor Shaw didn't hesitate and immediately led God to the breeding room he had specially rented for cultivating the three types of poisonous insects. Chapter 138 Harvest Day. The incubation room was originally a storeroom of the Academy of Ceres, located in a secluded corner of the college. After Instructor Shaw rented it long-term, he transformed it into a poisonous insect incubation room. The entrance to the incubation room is a sturdy hardwood door commonly used in storerooms, equipped with a simple small barrier. A special key must be inserted into a recessed slot in the center of the wooden door to unlock the barrier, after which the hardwood door can be opened. The entire poisonous insect incubation room is approximately 100 square meters, divided into two rooms, an incubation room and an incubation room. The incubation room is meticulously arranged, filled with incubation boxes arranged in a staggered pattern. The incubation boxes also have specially regulated temperature and humidity according to the different types of insect eggs, simulating the environment required for the development of poisonous insect eggs. The walls are inlaid with glowing magic crystal lamps, emitting a soft and even light that meets the lighting requirements of the poisonous insect eggs without being too glaring and affecting observation. A scent permeates the air, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. This was a nutrient solution that Shaw had carefully prepared using various materials, which, when added to the incubator, would promote better development of the venomous insect eggs. The rearing room, however, was much simpler. 3 large incubators were set up according to the needs of the 3 types of venomous insects, and a higher concentration of nutrient solution was added to them. You've mastered toxicity detection, right? Shaw confirmed. Gouda nodded. That's good. You need to check the eggs in the hatching room at least once a day using the toxicity detection function. Once you find toxins on an egg, it means the larvae inside have fully developed and will hatch within 1-2 days. You need to quickly transfer these soon-to-hatch eggs from the hatching room to the 3 incubation boxes in the rearing room. This is the incubation box for fire ants, and this is for scorpions. Shaw explained the details to Gouda, pointing to the last large incubation box. This is the incubation box for phantom thorn centipedes. Phantom thorn centipedes are a hybrid of phantom centipedes and thorn centipedes. A healthy fire ant larva should have a smooth, flawless body surface, clearly visible bright red markings on its back, a uniform and glossy color, and move nimbly and powerfully. If it has blurred back markings, a dull color, body deformities, or slow movement, it's a defective product. You need to remove it from the incubation box and dispose of it promptly to avoid negatively impacting the entire colony. The characteristics of healthy scorpion larvae are, and the same applies to phantom thorn centipedes. If you find any defective ones, you must dispose of them immediately. Finally, a reminder, their mothers have all undergone special cultivation by me, so even defective larvae contain considerable toxins. Be careful when handling them. Understood? I remember. Gouda nodded seriously. Here, there are a total of 137 fire-patterned ant eggs, 89 scorpion eggs, and 43 phantom thorn centipede eggs. Under normal circumstances, they will all hatch in about a month and a half. Finally, if the number of qualified larvae does not reach half the number of eggs, this task is considered a failure, and you will not receive any reward. It's equivalent to working for free for 2 months. If the number of qualified larvae reaches half the number of eggs, the task is considered complete. In addition, for every additional 10% of qualified larvae, I will pay you an extra 5 gold coins. The potion-making instructor's expression turned serious, combining kindness and severity. I will definitely do my best to complete the task with high quality and quantity, Gauda said respectfully. Seeing Gauda's demeanor, Shaw nodded in satisfaction. After giving several more instructions on ensuring the survival rate of the insect eggs, he tossed the key to the poisonous insect breeding room to Gauda and hurriedly left without looking back. Potions masters are always busy. After watching Shaw leave, Gauda put away the key and began to wander around the incubation room. Since he was already there, he might as well finish his work for the day. The next moment, Gauda cast Detect Poison to check for any insect eggs that were about to hatch. Sure enough, after spending half an hour checking a total of 269 insect eggs, Gauda actually found 4 eggs that had already produced toxins. Gauda quickly cast Mage's Hand and carefully took these 4 insect eggs out of the small incubator in the incubation room, and then placed them into the 3 large incubators corresponding to their species in the breeding room. After completing the inspection and confirming that the temperature and humidity of each incubator were within the optimal range for the insect eggs, Gauda closed the door of the poisonous insect breeding room again. Today's poisonous insect breeding work was now complete. He took out his pocket watch, glanced at the time, and realized it was already dinner time. Gauda rushed to the dining room. This time, he behaved himself, ordering a simple set meal of rye bread plus pea soup plus a piece of smoked pork costing 4 copper coins. After dinner, Gauda returned to Building 30 in Zone 1. Almost as soon as he got back to his room, Gauda eagerly went to the kitchen and opened the several earthenware jars fermenting fruit drinks made with leak-free water. A whole day had passed since he cast Water Creation Plus yesterday. Now was the time to verify his hypothesis. When Gauda opened the lid of the earthenware jar, that familiar, peculiar, and light fragrance, mixed with a faint fruity aroma, wafted from the jar and into his nose. An overwhelming joy welled up in Gauda's heart. The leak-free water in the clay jars hadn't disappeared. After half a day of fermentation, the leak-free water in several jars had undergone a slight color change, indicating that they had undergone some minor essential alteration. It was this change that allowed the leak-free water to remain. The conjecture was correct. In fact, the flaw in the water-making technique wasn't difficult to discover. The reason it hadn't been discovered, or rather, widely known, was simply because it wasn't necessary. The purpose of the water-making technique was to create drinking water for emergency use. And the purpose of creating drinking water was for drinking. If the water created by the water-making technique wasn't consumed within a day, causing it to dissipate, no one would care. Because you could simply cast the water-making technique again when needed. Who would bother to research how to preserve the drinking water created by the water-making technique? Gauda wouldn't either. He went to great lengths to preserve the leak-free water created by the water-making technique plus. I'll try it tomorrow and see if the effects of the leak-free water are still there after fermentation, Gauda thought to himself, clenching his fist. If the effects could be maintained, the remaining nearly 1 gallon of leak-free water fruit drink could last for almost a month if consumed sparingly. During this month, he would persist with his daily lottery, hoping to draw leak-free water again and continue. Once would be twice. Gauda believed that drawing leak-free water would definitely not be a one-time occurrence. As he thought this, he scooped out the fruit pieces from the earthenware jar to prevent further fermentation and avoid any further potential changes in the effects of the leak-free water. After doing all this, Gauda resealed the small earthenware jar and went to the large one. With a slight thought, Gauda's magic power began to flow. Liquid immediately began to gush out of the previously empty large earthenware jar. This was today's first draw of the day. In just a few seconds, 2 gallons of liquid had appeared in the jar. Gauda sniffed. The familiar, rich, sweet aroma wafted towards him. Damn, another minimum score. For the rest of the evening, Gauda's task was to thoroughly read the general books he had borrowed from the library, covering various fields. He had to fill in the gaps in his common sense in these areas as quickly as possible. Chapter 139 Outside the Door and Inside the Door. Dark Moon, the 24th. It was the same time as yesterday. Gauda once again arrived at the rune workshop on the 3rd floor of Gavin Building. Just like yesterday, he didn't see his mentor, Hosey O'Kenley. But this time, Gauda didn't need to make a sound. The old, calm voice already emanated from the small, closed room inside the workshop. It didn't seem as calm as yesterday. Gauda felt there was a hint of uncontrollable excitement in the old man's voice today. Perhaps it was just his imagination. Read the documents on the table first, and you can leave after you're done. It was the same sentence as yesterday. Not even a single word had changed. In a literary work, one might even suspect the author was being lazy and simply copied and pasted the previous text. But God didn't think about that. To him, it was just another instruction. He listened silently, his feet already moving to the workbench in the center of the room workshop. The workbench, which had been slightly messy yesterday, had been tidied up and was now much neater. And the documents Jose wanted him to see were now prominently displayed in the center. No longer would Gauda need to rely on guesswork to find the materials he needed, as he had yesterday. Introduction to Runes. The title was simple and easy to understand. It was clearly about runes. Although Gauda felt this was the material he should have been shown yesterday, at least to learn about runes before studying the basic rules, it didn't matter much. After all, the 6 basic rules of runes were also quite simple, and learning them a day earlier or later wouldn't make a significant difference. Therefore, the reversal order was understandable. The material was still handwritten, exactly the same as yesterday's introduction to runeology theory. Gauda opened the document, and the first thing he saw wasn't the word rune. Everything in the world has a trajectory. The wind has its own trajectory, the water has its own trajectory, the earth has its own trajectory, and even the omnipresent magic has its own trajectory. These trajectories are erratic and irregular. However, when the wind moves according to a certain trajectory, it becomes a devastating tornado. When the water flows according to a certain trajectory, it stirs up monstrous waves. When the earth cracks according to a certain trajectory, it brings about earth-shattering changes. We call these changes the forces of nature. The forces of nature are powerful, but we cannot obtain them except through magic. Undoubtedly, if magic flows according to a certain trajectory, it will only bring even greater power. The question is, how do we control this powerful magic? The initial answer is spells. Mages transform magic into mana within their bodies, and then control the trajectory of mana flow through spell models to release spells with different effects. But this is not the only solution. A mage's magical power is always limited, and this limited power determines the limited natural forces a mage can control. But the power of nature is limitless. Is there a way to utilize this limitless natural power? It's simple. Build a bridge. Use knowledge and wisdom to construct a bridge between humanity and nature. In the primitive era, our ancestors used their wisdom and knowledge to gradually harness the power of nature. This wisdom and knowledge is what we now commonly refer to as runes. Different design methods and different building materials result in bridges with varying load-bearing capacities. A rune master is a bridge designer. After an extremely long build-up, the word rune finally appeared in Gauda's field of vision for the first time. He remained silent and continued reading. The magic of heaven and earth flows without rules. Runes are the bridge between rune masters and the magic of heaven and earth. Once the rune master builds the bridge and allows it to flow, magic can create wind, water, shift stars, and change direction. The essence of a rune is to fix the flow of magic, guiding it along a predetermined path. Multiple basic runes can form composite runes, and multiple composite runes can form magic circles. The magic circle is the final form of runes, a complete system. Basic runes are the cornerstone of magic circles, the beginning of runecraft. The total number of basic runes in the world exceeds 80,000, and new basic runes are constantly being created. However, most of these basic runes are obscure. Only about 3,700 are truly commonly used. A qualified rune master only needs to master 1,002,000 basic runes, because 1,000 basic runes, when combined, can cover 90% of needs, and 2,000 basic runes, when combined, can cover 99% of needs. This introduction gave Gauda a strong sense of déjà vu. He paused, thought carefully, and finally realized, wasn't this exactly the same as the Chinese characters in his previous life? There are now over 100,000 Chinese characters, but only about 3,000 are truly commonly used. 1,000 commonly used characters can cover over 90% of expressive needs, and 2,000 can cover 99%. Furthermore, with the constant emergence of new things, these 2,000 long-existing commonly used characters can be perfectly combined to express ideas. For example, the characters for electricity and brain, which existed 1,000 years ago, can be combined 1,000 years later to express the newly born computer. The same concept applies to basic runes. With this connection, Gauda instantly understood the importance of basic runes. Undoubtedly, to get started with runeology, just as one needs to recognize characters to write an article, one must first master commonly used basic runes. Continuing down, It was indeed the case, though with a slight difference. Basic runes are divided into 8 levels, from level 0 to level 7, the first step to becoming a rune master, mastering 651 commonly used level 0 basic runes. This concludes the preface of Introduction to Runes. The following material contains illustrations and explanatory text for commonly used level 0 basic runes. However, the material doesn't list all 651 level 0 basic runes, only 10. Gata instantly understood. These 10 level 0 basic runes were his homework for the day, just like the homework exercises in yesterday's material. In addition, next to the material was a stack of blank basic magic paper, a basic rune pen, and a bottle of basic magic ink. This was the stationery I had prepared for Gata. The first level 0 basic rune introduced in the material was called Gathering Magic, level 0, and its function was simple, to gather the magic power of heaven and earth. But this seemingly simple function makes the Gathering Magic, level 0, rune an indispensable basic rune for almost all magic circles. Moreover, the rune diagram for Gathering Magic, level 0, is not simple either. Even though it's just a so-called level 0 basic rune, it's extremely complex. And there are no shortcuts. Only through repeated copying, memorization, and then integration and mastery can one truly understand it. Gata didn't even spend a second fearing the difficulty of the upcoming learning process. His mind was immediately focused on the rune diagram and deconstruction of Gathering Magic, level 0, in Introduction to Runes. Nothing else. Introduction to Runes was a handwritten document, clearly written by Jose O'Kenley. This chief rune instructor of the academy undoubtedly possessed an incredibly solid grasp of rune knowledge, so the deconstruction of the rune diagram was very concise yet clear. Gata read it carefully, and soon finished the first reading. Then, he closed the document and began to ponder, to recall. About 30 seconds later, Gata opened the document again, rereading the parts that were unclear or incomprehensible during his review and contemplation. This time, it took him less time than the first time. Then, he closed the document again, pondering and recalling. 20 seconds later, he opened the document again and began reading again. After repeating this 7 or 8 times, Gata closed the document once more and reviewed it, this time smoothly without any hesitation or stumbling. The rune diagrams were done in the same way. In the quiet rune workshop, only the rustling sound of Gata turning the pages of the document could be heard. When he closed Introduction to Runes for the last time, he did not open it again. Gata took a deep breath, picked up the rune pen, filled it with magical ink, unfolded a piece of magical paper, and began to write. Gata, attempting to copy runes for the first time, held his breath, his eyes focused and serious. At the same time, the magic power within his body was transmitted from his palm to the rune pen in his hand, and then through the pen tip, mixed with magical ink, fell evenly and steadily onto the magical paper. When he first put pen to paper, Gata was somewhat cautious, worried about failure. But the moment he started writing, all his distracting thoughts vanished instantly, leaving only the rune diagram and its corresponding deconstruction in his mind. Gata was completely immersed in drawing the basic rune for Gathering Magic, level 0. There's a widely circulated saying among mages, spells are a private realm open only to geniuses, but in the field of runeology, genius is merely the entry ticket. It requires not only extraordinary talent, but also exceptional control, outstanding creativity, strong mental strength, excellent memory, sufficient focus and patience, and, above all, a touch of purity. And Gata has always been pure in his approach to learning. Meanwhile, in a room just a door away, Gata's mentor whom he hadn't yet met, put down his rune pen and magic paper. On the magic paper, a rune diagram that looked like an incomprehensible book to the untrained eye, a rune diagram far more complex than the Gathering Magic, level 0, rune diagram, was displayed like a work of art. The old man gazed at the complex rune diagram before him, lost in deep thought. This rune diagram wasn't a conventional magic circle experiment, but rather a test rune diagram he was conducting to deduce the interference constant. It included robustness tests accurate to 4 decimal places, regular energy increments, and a series of complex changes in rune logarithms and interference logarithms. These things were not easy to deal with. It required an extremely large amount of computation, an extremely solid foundation in runic literature, and an extremely large number of experiments. Even Jose O'Kenley, who was deeply immersed in the field of runic literature and had single-handedly derived 6, or rather, 5.5, fundamental rules of runic literature, initially found it daunting. Just thinking about the massive number of experiments required made him feel at a loss. He even doubted whether he could complete these experiments and deduce the interference constant in the final days of his life. But he understood that this interference constant affected the validity of the 6 fundamental rules of runic literature, hiding the most essential secret of rune arrangement. So, after calming himself down, his eye picked up the ordinary paper and pen that had been lying aside again and began recording the data. This journey had only just begun. Whether he could reach the end was another matter. He just had to keep moving forward. His attitude towards runes had always been pure. One was an old man, an expert who had been immersed in the field of rune literature for hundreds of years. The other was a young man, a complete novice who had only been involved in the field of rune literature for a day. 2 people who were worlds apart in age, status, and knowledge were now in the same room, striving for the same thing. The distance between them was only a door. Chapter 140 The Unaware Genius. The light in the rune workshop remained constant, obscuring the passage of time. Gada attempted to draw 4 times, succeeding on the 3rd attempt after his first failure. Looking at the intricate basic rune-gathering magic he had drawn on the magic paper, Gada's eyes brightened slightly. Light flowed within these complex lines, gathering the wandering magic power of heaven and earth at a steady but slow pace. Gada watched this scene with awe. He felt an indescribable beauty, just some cold lines, deconstructed and recombined within the knowledge system of runic writing, could transform into such an inexplicable magical power. The last time he felt this beauty was in mathematics. Some cold numbers and symbols, combined, could become a harmonious and beautiful formula, expressing extremely complex concepts and rules. It was this beauty that made Gada fall in love with mathematics. Gada had always thought there was no other subject in the world as beautiful as mathematics. Now, in another different world, Gada had finally encountered a second mathematics that he thought didn't exist. After experiencing the beauty and awe emanating from the runes, Gada was filled with delight. His curiosity piqued, he was overjoyed. In his eyes, the seemingly lifeless level 0 basic rune-gathering magic on the magic paper was so vibrant, as if it might come to life at any moment. Gada set aside the 4 magic papers and reopened the Introduction to Runes document. The second level 0 basic rune recorded there was called restriction. Its function was that the system would only function if magic power passed through all the restriction runes in the system, which could be a composite rune or a magic circle. If any restriction rune malfunctioned or no magic power passed through, the system would not function. The third level 0 basic rune was called allowance. If multiple allowance runes existed in a system, the system could function normally as long as at least one allowance rune had magic power passing through it. The fifth level 0 basic rune was called connection. Its function was to act as a bridge connecting basic runes that were inherently incompatible, thus forming composite runes. The last level 0 basic rune was diffusion, which spreads the effect of a basic rune to other systems. After successfully drawing the final diffusion rune on the magic paper, Gada rubbed his slightly sore eyes with a sigh of relief. He noticed that not only were his eyes sore, but his wrists were also trembling slightly. Only then did Gada snap back to reality, realizing he was starving. His already limited mana was nearly depleted during the rune drawing process. Startled, he quickly pulled out his pocket watch and saw that it was already 4 in the afternoon. That meant he had been standing there for almost 8 hours without a moment's rest. Gada opened his mouth, somewhat helplessly. This was a long-standing ailment of his. Once he entered a problem-solving state, he would completely lose himself, oblivious to the flow of his surroundings, even the passage of time, entering a state of obsession. Without external intervention, he wouldn't recover from this state until he had solved all the problems in his hand. To others, this is called focus. But excessive focus can sometimes cause trouble. For example, when he first encountered Math Olympiad problems in elementary school, he was stumped by the last, most challenging problem, racking his brains and even breaking out in a cold sweat. It was just like when his mother, who had been waiting for him to come home from school, spent 2 or 3 hours searching the streets before finally finding him in a dimly lit classroom, still engrossed in the last problem. Seeing his mother, also sweating profusely, Gada realized for the first time that sometimes he also needed to learn to control and suppress his focus. But if a problem were so easy to overcome, it wouldn't be a problem. Problems are stubborn. For example, right now, just a moment of carelessness, and he had fallen into this state of forgetting himself and the world again. Damn it, Gauda's personality meant that he wouldn't be deterred by the tedious process of memorizing and copying runes, and he rarely swore. But as he wiped the sweat that had somehow seeped onto his forehead, he couldn't help but mutter a rare curse to himself. Of course, it wasn't to swear, it was just that at this moment, only profanity could most concisely and powerfully express his inner emotions. No wonder runeology is said to have the highest barrier to entry. Even a single assignment had consumed so much of his time, energy, and effort to barely complete. Thinking that all rune masters had gone through this process, Gauda felt a strange sense of awe. He felt a profound respect for the rune master community, along with an unprecedented sense of defeat. However, Gauda didn't wallow in self-pity, he simply accepted the fact that his aptitude for rune learning wasn't particularly outstanding. Although in his previous life before coming to this world, Gauda had been praised as a genius more than once. At least in all his academic studies during his school years, he had always felt effortlessly at ease. Learning had always been a simple matter for him. Very occasionally, he would even feel like a genius. For example, when he discovered a mathematical formula that he had casually thought of during a break between classes years ago, and then encountered it in his current class. But Gauda wasn't arrogant enough to believe that his learning talent, honed in a technologically advanced world, would be equally applicable in a world with a supernatural system. Everyone has their strengths. Since he excelled in mathematics, he wouldn't necessarily be as adept in other areas. However, this didn't deter Gauda from continuing his study of runecraft. He genuinely loved the beauty of runes. Despite his hunger and exhaustion, Gauda diligently finished his homework, neatly stacking it next to his materials. This was for his mentor, Hizai, to check. After completing this, he silently turned to leave. Before exiting the rune workshop, he glanced once more at the inner room where Hizai Alkenli was. The door remained closed. Perhaps it had been opened, but he hadn't noticed while engrossed in his work. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was starving and needed to eat quickly. Gauda left, and the workshop remained quiet. After some time, a slightly pale and exhausted Hizai opened the door to his laboratory and emerged. For a third-ring mage like him, even in his old age, his energy and stamina far surpassed that of ordinary people. However, the work he did was incredibly demanding, making fatigue inevitable. Yet, amidst this fatigue, there was a hint of satisfaction. This satisfaction was difficult to describe in ordinary language, only an ancient saying from Gauda's past life could accurately summarize it. Hearing the way in the morning, he habitually walked to his workbench and began tidying it. Then, he suddenly remembered that he had brought some introductory materials he had compiled for the students named Gauda that day. "I wonder how he's doing with them," the old man muttered abruptly. He saw a small stack of magic papers neatly arranged on the workbench, covered with basic runes. Compared to yesterday, this time Hizai's pupils didn't dilate, but rather contracted sharply. He picked up Gauda's homework and carefully examined each page. For a high-level rune master who had immersed himself in rune literature for hundreds of years, these simple basic rune papers shouldn't have been particularly interesting. But at this moment, Hizai's eyes were filled with amazement, as if he were admiring a work of art. The old man, who rarely swore, spoke it, with a serious tone, steady voice, and clear pronunciation. It didn't sound like he was swearing at all. And indeed, he wasn't. The old man simply needed those 3 words to express his inner emotions. After reading Gauda's homework, he seemed even more energized. Hizai put down the stack of magic papers and softly added after, "Damn it, this is truly a genius." Chapter 141 Accumulation. 10 Level 0 Basic Runes. For a second-tier mage apprentice who had never been exposed to runic literature, to draw them all, from understanding to memorizing, and then successfully drawing them, 10 days would be a relatively excellent achievement. This was also the expected time that Hizai had set for Gauda. Having just started learning runic literature, mastering 1 basic rune a day was quite a challenge. But the old man believed that Gauda could do it. Gauda did not disappoint the old man's high expectations. He just did a little too well. He actually mastered all 10 level 0 basic runes in just 1 day. Moreover, the basic runes Gauda drew were very standard. If it weren't for the failed rune diagrams beside him, if it weren't for the obvious untrained novice's handwriting in the details of the rune drawings, Hizai would even think that this was the work of a seasoned runic artist. Looking at the extremely standard basic runes on the magic paper, Hizai didn't doubt whether it was Gauda's work. There was no feedback from a third party visiting the magic circle in the rune workshop. Therefore, He began to doubt the credibility of the information he had obtained about Gauda. According to the Academy's information, Gauda's mage level is only that of a second-tier mage apprentice. Learning and mastering basic runes, while only the most fundamental part of runic literature, roughly equivalent to the relationship between creation and literacy, is still limited by the physiological foundation of a second-tier mage apprentice. It's impossible for a second-tier mage apprentice to master 10 level 0 basic runes in a single day. Drawing runes requires mana, and controlling the precise flow of mana requires mental energy. These are hard requirements that cannot be simplified or omitted. A second-tier mage apprentice's mental energy is insufficient for precise control over mana. The inability to control the precise flow of mana results in even more mana being consumed during the drawing process. And unfortunately, a second-tier mage apprentice's mana is as scarce as their mental energy. Historical experience has long proven that a second-tier mage apprentice, assuming a certain talent for runes, is already considered very excellent if they master one basic rune per day. A third-tier mage apprentice, on the other hand, can learn 2 to 3 basic runes per day. The former would need 2 years to master 651 basic level 0 runes, while the latter could complete it within a year. Therefore, it's best to begin learning runology after reaching the level of a third-grade mage apprentice or higher. So, what does it mean for a second-grade mage apprentice to master 10 basic level 0 runes in a day? If that's true, it just means this guy isn't human. Hizai shook his head, dismissing the inappropriate joke. It could only mean that this person has an astonishing intuition and control over runes. This allows him to control the flow of mana through intuition when drawing runes. That's why he can achieve a level of precision that a second-grade mage apprentice's mental strength could never reach, and also reduce mental energy consumption to an unimaginably low level. Hizai was very clear about the background of this student Gauda, whom the Academy had forced upon him. A lucky one and a country bumpkin who entered the Academy with a recommendation letter from the former dean. As a country bumpkin, he naturally couldn't have been exposed to runology before entering the Academy, because rune masters are extremely rare. Therefore, he never doubted Gauda's answer yesterday that he had never been exposed to rune literature. But because of the manuscript Gauda left behind yesterday, and that interference constant, Hizai was absolutely certain, although Gauda had never been exposed to rune literature, he must possess extremely high talent in this field. He might even be the only person in the world who could understand, accept, and master his rune logic and calculations. If Hizai had previously only wanted to teach Gauda something out of an instinctive sense of responsibility, after yesterday, he genuinely wanted to cultivate Gauda into an excellent rune master, even if fellow practitioner. Transforming a country bumpkin into an excellent rune master was by no means a simple matter. Of course, he didn't mean to look down on country bumpkins, because, in his eyes, everyone in the Duchy of Zine, including those self-proclaimed high and mighty nobles, were actually so-called country bumpkins, but in any case, that was the truth. Therefore, Hizai had already considered deriving the interference constant and cultivating Gauda as the two most important and difficult tasks in the last period of his life. But now, it seems that this second task is not as difficult as he imagined. When Gauda finished eating and came to the cultivation building, it was almost 6 o'clock in the afternoon. To be honest, a day of rune learning had left him quite exhausted. But this was not a reason to waste today's cultivation. The more important reason was that after he tried drinking the specially made leak-free water fruit drink, he was pleasantly surprised to find that his fatigue quickly subsided. The slight molecular change brought about by fruit fermentation was not enough to change the powerful effect of leak-free water. This was great news, which made Gauda's spirits much more excited. This meant that in the next month, before the leak-free fruit drink was consumed, his progress in guiding his cultivation would be faster than drinking basic magic potions. At the counter, Gauda simply waved his hand and paid 10 gold coins, purchasing 40 hours of first-tier training room usage time in one go. When Gauda left the training room, even after drinking the leak-free water fruit drink, the deep weariness on his face lingered. The thought that he still had something to do made him even more exhausted. Poisonous insect cultivation. When Gauda hurriedly arrived at the cultivation room, opened the hardwood door with a key, and saw the more than 200 insect eggs lying quietly inside, awaiting his inspection, he couldn't help but feel a pang of melancholy. Goodbye, leisurely days. Gauda first used poison detection to transfer the 6 newly discovered eggs about to hatch to the large incubation box in the cultivation room. He then checked the eggs that had been moved there the day before and found that one fire ant larva had already hatched. The remaining eggs also showed cracks on their surfaces and were slightly swollen, not far from hatching. The hatched larvae did not need Gouda to feed them. The nutrient solution specially prepared by Shore in the incubator provided the necessary components for the larvae's growth. His job was simply to ensure no accidents occurred and to sift through and dispose of any defective specimens. Following Shore's instructions, Gouda carefully examined the newly hatched fire ant larva. Smooth, flawless body surface, acceptable. No deformities, no sluggish movements, acceptable. The fiery red markings on its back, not clear, mostly blurry. Unacceptable. One defective feature meant the fire ant larva was a defective product and needed to be disposed of immediately. Gouda didn't hesitate. He used his mage's hand to scoop the larva from the nutrient solution. Then, from 7 or 8 meters away, he easily crushed a larva, less than a day old, with his mage's hand. The larva's bodily fluids, mixed with crimson fire poison, splattered onto the ground, hissing and releasing a small plume of thick white smoke. Gouda's heart tightened involuntarily. If he hadn't taken these larvae seriously and had dealt with them directly instead of using his mage's hand, he would already be infected. Having finished everything and preparing to call it a day, Gouda focused his attention on Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. A new entry had appeared. Origin. 0 Rings, Fire Kiss Ant, January 7th. Chapter 142, The Mage's Hand. Gouda entered the quiet Galvin building with practiced ease. He walked down the long corridor to the 3rd floor, encountering only 2 strangers in total. There were no pleasantries, everyone seemed preoccupied with their own urgent matters, their steps hurried. Gouda liked this atmosphere. He expertly went to the rune workshop on the 3rd floor, and the moment he stepped inside, his expression instantly turned serious. It was as if he were about to face a powerful enemy. 10 basic level 0 runes were indeed a formidable enemy for Gouda at his current level. He wasn't afraid of the tedium of learning. On the contrary, he even found learning runes quite enjoyable. Both the beauty of the runes and the acquisition of knowledge gave Gouda immense satisfaction. But no matter how much he enjoyed learning runes, he couldn't change the physical and mental strain the process consumed. His seriousness stemmed from this. The instant Gouda entered the workshop, that familiar, aged voice calmly rang out. This voice, like a machine, didn't greet Gouda, directly issuing today's instructions. Look at the documents on the table first. Rune drawing doesn't need to be done in the workshop, just bring them to me for inspection tomorrow. You can take the magic paper, rune pen, and magic ink with you. Compared to the previous 2 days, Hosey O'Kenley's words today were finally not just copy and paste. Gouda listened silently, his hands already opening the documents on the table. The first part was about the basic brushstrokes needed to master in the rune drawing process. These included dotting, releasing, touching, flicking, and lifting. These brushstrokes allow rune artists to better control their brushstrokes, thereby increasing stability and reducing mana consumption, etc. In addition, there were basic mana delivery techniques, which can make the flow of mana more stable during rune drawing, thereby increasing the success rate of rune drawing. The more Gouda looked, the more he felt that this should have been what he learned before drawing runes yesterday. Of course, he didn't know that this was indeed the order Hosey had planned. Yesterday, he only wanted Gouda to be familiar with runes, not to immediately master the 10 basic runes. The real attempt to draw runes should begin after learning the brushstrokes and mana delivery techniques today. Yesterday was Gouda's first rune class. If the intensity and difficulty had been maximized from the start, it would have only made Gouda resistant and fearful. In a sense, Hosey was indeed a good instructor, except for being too quiet. Although this wasn't exactly a flaw, he just happened to be paired with an even quieter Gouda. So, Gouda, relying on his own understanding and without asking many questions, successfully misunderstood and finished all 10 level 0 basic runes in one go. Thus, the order of the teaching logic was reversed. Of course, this wasn't a big deal. Gouda continued to silently flip through the materials. At the end of the materials, there were rune diagrams and corresponding deconstruction explanations. The meaning was also concise and clear, just learn it. However, there were only 5 level 0 basic runes today. This meant that Gouda could complete today's learning in a relatively relaxed state and would have more energy and time to do other things. This relieved him. If every day was like this, Gouda's worries would not exist. He had also taken 8 elective courses, which would start intensively next month, undoubtedly requiring a lot of his energy and time. With his mood slightly relaxed, Gata even had the extra energy to ponder what kind of person this head of the rune department, who had come 3 times but never been seen and always remained secluded in his small room, was. At least for now, Gata's impression of him was limited to mysterious and busy. While Gata was speculating about what kind of person Hosey O'Kenley was, the old man was also contemplating the young student outside the door, or rather, his student. Both in name and in reality, he had already assumed the responsibility of Gata's mentor. He had never imagined that a young man who had never even touched runes could, through intuition, propose the concept of interference constant, which had troubled him for years. Nor had he ever seen a young man display such composure and astonishing talent amidst the tedious and monotonous study of runes. Undoubtedly, the young man outside the door, his first student in so many years, had already displayed boundless talent in the field of runes. Even in his birthplace, the most technologically advanced place on the continent, Hosey had never seen such talent. Therefore, the question before him was, how to protect and cultivate Gata's boundless talent. Hosey O'Kenley thought long and hard last night, and the first thing he did was to lighten Gata's load. His initial intention was simply for Gata to master 10 basic runes within 10 days, but Gata's misunderstanding inadvertently revealed his limits. However, such limits were unnecessary. He was still a very young child with plenty of time. Prolonged, extreme study would only erode a person's spirit and passion, and deplete their potential. Too much of a good thing is bad, and this applies to any field. Of course, Gata couldn't be too relaxed either. At least one basic rune was too few for such a genius. Therefore, after careful consideration, Hosey O'Kenley set the number of basic runes Gata needed to master each day at 5. In the following days, Gata's life gradually became more regular. He would go to Gavin's tower at a set time in the morning to collect and review the day's materials, then master 5 new level 0 basic runes, which usually only took a morning. The afternoons and evenings were for cultivation, poisonous insect cultivation, and reading books borrowed from the library. Gata cherished these days, because he knew that after the elective courses started, he wouldn't have the free time or energy to read general books unrelated to the courses. His understanding of this world was rapidly increasing with the amount of books he read. Along with this rapid increase was his mastery of basic runes and his progress bar in the Origin Realm. The last day of the Dark Moon. Origin Realm. 0 rings, Fire Kiss Ant, 7/7, Scorpion, 7/7, 1 ring, Phantom Thorn Centipede, 2/7, except for the Phantom Thorn Centipede, which was only 1 ring and had a total of 43 eggs. The Origin Realm progress of the other 2 0-ring poisonous insects was full. Back in his dormitory, Gata immediately sat cross-legged, focused his mind, and silently chanted, Wind Spirit Moon Shadow. A simple spell interface popped up. Gata's gaze swept over the spells that hadn't been upgraded yet, and he had already made his decision. He skillfully tapped the flashing yellow plus sign after the spell's name with his consciousness. The next moment, Wind Spirit Moon Shadow, activate. The Big Dipper, representing the origin of the Fire Kiss Ants, combines with the original spell model of Geode, expanding. A moment later, Mage Hand Plus, alteration, 0 rings, within the casting range, a floating ghost hand appears, persisting until the spell ends or is manually dispelled. If the ghost hand is more than 30 feet, 10 meters, away, or if Mage Hand is cast again, the existing ghost hand will disappear. Mage Hand can perform simple actions, such as manipulating an object, opening an unlocked door or container, or emptying the contents of a vial, but cannot carry objects weighing more than 10 pounds, approximately 4.5 kilograms, or activate spell items. Additional, you will be able to control 2 mage hands simultaneously and perform more complex actions, just like your own hands. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143 The Frosty Moon. This time, Gata chose Hand of the Mage for his stat allocation. The reason was simple. Hand of the Mage was an extremely common spell for mages, and could be used consistently throughout the game. Therefore, even if it lacked defensive power, it was worth the stat allocation. As for the remaining Scorpion stat, Gata decided to save it for later. He would need to learn a large number of spells in the future for his superior feats, so it was better to save it for rarer spells, such as the soon-to-be-acquired Swarm Spawn. A very reasonable approach. Frost Gold Month 1. The day of the public recruitment for Cyrus Academy. This was one of the most bustling days of the year for the Academy. Not only the Academy, but the entire city of St. Sen was exceptionally lively because of Cyrus Academy's recruitment. However, this liveliness was none of Gada's concern. He didn't care. Comparatively, Gada was more concerned about the 5 level 0 basic runes he needed to master today, and even more concerned about the little poisonous insects in the breeding room. After all, that was related to his reward. Thinking this, Gada opened his handwritten study materials for the day. Then, in his long 9-day rune learning journey, Gada encountered a predicament for the first time. He pondered for a long time, finally moving from his workbench towards the small, tightly closed room, and gently, for the first time, knocked on the door. "I've been waiting for you to come to me." The door opened automatically under the influence of the runes. Hosey O'Kenley, who was prepared, smiled at Gada standing in the doorway and said, "To learn runes well, diligence and a willingness to ask questions are indispensable." Gada was too embarrassed to explain to Hosey that it wasn't that he didn't want to ask questions, but that he could completely understand the materials from the past few days and there was nothing he needed to ask. However, such an answer would seem too immodest, and contradicting Hosey would not be good. Gada never blindly believed in authority, but that didn't affect his respect for his teacher. So his choice was to smile awkwardly. This was the first time Gada had met his mentor. It was also the first time Hosey had met his student. Both of them were sizing each other up. His eye perfectly matched Gada's image of a senior mentor, referring to those highly respected professors in his previous life. His aged face bore the fine lines of time, yet possessed a pair of deep, unwavering eyes, like a reef in the sea, weathered by storms yet still standing firm. On the table before his eye lay a mountain of scrap paper and rune diagrams, suggesting he had been holed up in his room conducting experiments. Gada, too, matched his eye's impression of him perfectly. Silent and calm, seemingly unremarkable, yet incredibly reliable. Like a stone in a latrine. His eye had long wanted to meet his student, a student with boundless talent in rune literature. However, his initial actions had strangely kept their interactions confined to this single doorway. His eye felt that, as the mentor, Gada should, from any perspective, be the one to initiate a meeting. Gada felt that since his eye had chosen this method of communication and teaching, it meant that he was busy and didn't want to be disturbed, so Gada chose to try not to bother his eye. Both of them were absolutely certain of their judgment. His eye, who hadn't received a response from Gada, started to challenge him. He was an approachable person, but that didn't mean he didn't care about his image. He could even be a little childish at times. However, dragging it out too long wasn't good either, because classes were about to start. So, to get Gada to come to him, his eye had very despicable added a little bit of the second stage rune literature course content to Gada's materials today. The effect was outstanding. After a long silence, Gada respectfully said, "Professor, I have a question about today's materials." His eye grunted expressionlessly. "You've taken rune literature." His eye didn't immediately answer Gada's question, but asked this question instead. Gada paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, classes are about to start. You don't need to attend this class," his eye said calmly. "Huh?" Gada didn't react immediately. "Beg's teaching style isn't suitable for you, and he can't teach you." Beg was the instructor for the first stage of the rune literature course. Gada hesitated and struggled. "Just learn from me. I've already applied for an exemption for you. You only need to participate in the final assessment. If you pass, you'll get the credits for the course." His eye looked at Gada calmly, his deep eyes seemingly able to see through Gada's thoughts. Sure enough, after his eye said this, the hesitation and struggle in Gada's expression instantly disappeared. He nodded. "I understand, instructor. Also, don't reveal your progress in rune literature to anyone," his eye added. "If anyone asks you, just say I told you not to disclose it." Gada frowned slightly. This was a strange request. But he vaguely sensed that his eye seemed to be doing it for his own good. But whatever his eye's purpose in making this request, it wouldn't cause him any loss, so Gada nodded and agreed to his eye's request. Looking at the young Gada, his eye thought of himself many years ago. Exceptional talent is a good thing, but if talent is too outstanding and lacks matching power, it can turn into a disaster. This was a realization he had gained through personal experience. Moreover, Gauda's talent far surpassed his own. As for the question you just raised, his eye tapped the table with his aged fingers, giving a concise and clear answer to Gauda's question. Gauda was in a very good mood when he left Galvin building. He had finally met his mentor today. And this mentor seemed very kind, giving him a sense of warmth he had only felt with the highly respected professors of his previous life, a rare thing in this world. Although Gauda didn't know where this warmth came from. Actually, a famous saying from another field could explain it well: only technology can truly connect with technology. Of course, Gauda didn't realize this was the reason. Because from any perspective, as a beginner in rune literature, there was no way he could be considered connected with technology with a senior rune mentor. Gauda didn't care about the academy's admissions. However, while dining at the restaurant that evening, he inevitably overheard some news about the admissions day. For example, this year, Cir's Academy admitted a total of 21 mages, the largest number of new students in the past 5 years. Among these 21 new students was even a 14-year-old first-rank mage. Reaching the level of a third-rank mage apprentice at that age was extremely difficult. Not to mention, this person had successfully advanced to first-rank mage without taking any advancement potions. His mage talent was undeniable. Even more astonishingly, it was said that this person's awakened specialty was an extremely powerful super magic specialty. Therefore, although he hadn't yet become a formal student of the academy, he had already been pre-booked as a student by the Minister of Magic. Amidst the surrounding discussions, Gauda heard the name of this new student, Yulan. The day was Frostgold's second. Of the 8 courses Gauda had chosen this year, one finally started today: Geography of the Nolan Continent and Geography of War. Chapter 144 Northern Territory. Geography of Nolan Continent and Geography of War is a branch course under the compulsory course Basic Culture. This course is offered 4 times a year. Gauda enrolled in the first session, taught by instructor Mo. Senator. Classes are held on the afternoons of the second day of each of the 3 months: Frost Gold Month, Mist Frost Month, and Frozen Month. The classroom for this course is very large. Firstly, because this course is notoriously one of the easy courses in the academy, with a large number of students each session, more seats are needed. The content of Geography of Nolan Continent and Geography of War is relatively simple, and the assessments are easy to pass, yet it can earn up to 2 credits. Almost all students take this course at least once a year. Some students even use it as insurance if they are short of 10 credits. If they can't accumulate enough credits in a year, they quickly enroll in this course to get through the year with those 2 valuable credits. Secondly, as a geography course, although it is an indoor course, a sand table simulating the terrain is needed for more intuitive teaching. Each student was provided with a sand table, each occupying several square meters, naturally requiring a large classroom space. Gauda entered the classroom a quarter of an hour before class started. By then, there were already quite a few students in the classroom. Just the class time alone was enough to distinguish students of different personalities. Some liked to arrive early, some liked to arrive a little earlier, some liked to arrive right on time, and a very small number liked to be late. Gauda belonged to the group of students who liked to arrive a little earlier. Arriving too early was unnecessary and a waste of time, while arriving right on time was not safe and could easily lead to being late. And being late, in Gauda's view, was bad behavior. Sure enough, after Gauda, more than a dozen students arrived one after another. Of course, without exception, they were all returning students. Gauda was the only first-year student among them. The other freshmen were still mining at the bottom of the Cooley Cliff. At the exact moment, a thin old man with curly brown hair, wearing a robe with the academy's insignia, walked in through the main entrance carrying a roll of parchment. The thin old man was their instructor, Instructor Morrison. The moment Instructor Morrison entered, the faint whispers that had lingered in the classroom vanished, replaced by a sudden silence. Without any introductions, Instructor Morrison went straight to the point. At the very front of the classroom was a very large whiteboard. Strangely, however, the whiteboard wasn't hanging, it lay flat, supported by a platform below. At least, when Gauda first saw the whiteboard, he couldn't imagine what it was for. However, his question was now answered. Instructor Morrison stood in front of the whiteboard, raised one hand, and lightly moved his fingers. A subtle magical fluctuation immediately filled the air. Under his gesture, a light gradually appeared on the huge whiteboard. Within the light, a 3-dimensional map model began to condense. The Nolan continent is the name of the continent where this land beneath our feet is located, Instructor Morrison began to explain as soon as the map took shape. From the sky, the Nolan continent is an irregular pentagon, resembling a bird about to take flight, long and narrow at the bottom, short and wide at the top. As an aside, this world isn't just the Nolan continent. Below and to the right of Nolan are two other continents, Terra and Midgard. These three continents together form the map of our world. Of course, the Nolan continent ranks first among the three in both area and overall strength. Alright, now back to the main topic. Instructor Morrison only briefly mentioned the other two continents. After all, the course was titled, Geography of the Nolan Continent and the Geography of War. Then, he made a rotating gesture. In the 3D map model condensed from light, the whitish area at the top began to highlight, becoming exceptionally conspicuous. What an advanced teaching method! Looking at this kind of 3D projected map, Gotta secretly sighed. Sometimes, magic can even outperform technology. This area is the northernmost region of the Nolan continent, which we call the North. The North is a land of ice and snowstorms, with an extremely harsh environment, perpetually cold, and relentless ice and snowstorms. The land of the North is also known as the permafrost tundra, where almost no food can grow. Therefore, the humans living on this land are nomadic hunter-gatherer people who live by hunting. Instructor Morrison snapped his fingers, marking the edge of the North region with a red light. The northern border is the Ivanlia Mountains, the highest mountain range on the Nolan continent, with an average altitude of over 8,000 meters. It is this mountain range that isolates the northern border from the icy storms, creating completely different landscapes and climates on either side. Because of this formidable barrier, although the northern region belongs to the same Nolan continent as our southern region, there is almost no interaction between the two, making it seem like an independent continent. Of course, crossing the Ivanlia Mountains isn't the only way to enter the northern border. Mosin drew a line in the air, and soon two blue lines appeared on the map, marking the outer perimeter of the Nolan continent. Entering the north by sea is a more logical choice. However, due to early internal strife and its frontier location, the northern peoples dislike interaction with the outside world and are extremely hostile towards outsiders. Furthermore, their nomadic nature dictates that they migrate with the seasons and their prey, leading a nomadic life without fixed settlements. Therefore, there are no large ports in the north. Due to these limitations, communication between the outside world and the north has been extremely limited, with only occasional groups of mages sailing into the north. Because of its isolation and environment, the north possesses many high-level magical plants and ley-line resources rarely seen outside, making it a treasure trove untouched by the outside world. Instructor Morrison explained, these mages risk entering the north for this very reason. In addition, the Vikings in the north also sail south in their self-built wolf ships during the summer when the ports thaw, raiding and plundering resources. However, this is a matter for countries along the coast to worry about, and has nothing to do with our Duchy of Zin. Instructor Morrison shrugged, simply ending his introduction to the Northern Territory. The light on the Northern Territory region on the 3D map dimmed. What lit up next was the eastern region of the map. This time, the lit area was vast. Almost half of the remaining territory of the Nolan continent excluding the Northern Territory. Instructor Morrison paused, waiting for the students to memorize the entire area and have a general impression before asking, do you know what this area is? Could it be Eastern Wilderness? This slightly mischievous thought subconsciously popped into Gauda's mind. According to the classic settings in his previous life's online novels, the counterpart to the Northern Territory should be Eastern Wilderness, Western Desert, and Southern Sea. Some students raised their hands. These were students of noble birth. For them, this knowledge was already familiar. They didn't need to learn it from class, so they could naturally answer Instructor Morrison's question. At Instructor Morrison's prompting, the student who raised their hand revealed the answer. This is the territory of the Holy Empire. Chapter 145 The Holy Empire, Plantagenet Dynasty. Yes, Instructor Morrison's expression inexplicably became fervent, and he exclaimed in a slightly longing tone, this area, which occupies almost half of the Nolan continent, belongs entirely to the Holy Empire. The Holy Empire is the only empire on this continent, and even in this world, it possesses the largest territory and the most powerful force on the Nolan continent. And even if we look beyond Nolan to the entire world, the same is true, because what you see here is not even the entirety of the Holy Empire's territory. The Holy Empire also possesses its own territories on the Terra and Midgard continents. It is the only country whose territory spans 3 continents. Instructor Morrison became particularly excited and talkative when talking about the Holy Empire. Before it, no country could do that, and after it, as it stands, the Holy Empire is still growing stronger, and it is almost impossible for it to weaken and perish. History tells us that there is no empire that does not weaken and perish. Even the British Empire disintegrated. God thought to himself. The Holy Empire originated from a union of barbarian tribes, Instructor Morrison said in a melodious voice. Several barbarian tribes left the wilderness, came to the civilized lands, and then joined forces to occupy an ancient city. From the very beginning, as barbarians, they faced threats from various civilized peoples, because to the civilized, they were foreign invaders. According to Gauda's understanding, this might be equivalent to the Mongols leaving the grasslands and entering the central plains. But they were warlike and skilled in battle, clashing with all enemies and holding grudges. Ultimately, they won all the wars and established a foothold in civilized lands. After establishing a foothold, the next step was continuous expansion. This history instilled a deep sense of pride in the people of the Holy Empire, and it serves as a valuable reference for the people of other nations. Because of this history, the Holy Empire values talent and strength above all else. At the same time, the barbarian tribes, initially lacking magical prowess, suffered many losses and casualties in earlier battles, so they highly revered and respected the power of magic. Furthermore, their thinking was both barbaric and enlightened. They were never conservative and allowed for continuous innovation in magic. In the eyes of many people from other countries, the Holy Empire was a bloodthirsty, cruel, and insatiable nation, a warmongering power because since emerging from the wilderness, they had never ceased their expansionist advance. Instructor Morrison spoke with great enthusiasm, seemingly filled with approval, even admiration, for the Holy Empire. As you can see, they have grown from a single ancient city into a powerful empire spanning 3 continents. But for the people of the Holy Empire, it is the most tolerant and harmonious nation. Even many people from other countries agree, because the Holy Empire's social atmosphere is exceptionally inclusive, something no other nation can match. It respects everyone's talents and strength, rather than valuing birth, social position, lineage, or even homeland. Some who disdain or hate the Holy Empire believe this is because the Holy Empire's origins are merely those of the lowest barbarian tribes. Naturally, they don't value these things. At this point, Instructor Morrison showed a hint of disdain. If you can't do it yourself, then you slander it. That's human nature. After expressing his disdain, he continued his lecture. The people of the Holy Empire respect strength above all else, but the strength they respect is not merely force. Strength manifests in more ways than just force. Those who demonstrate outstanding talent in politics, magic, creation, and even trade are also respected by the people of the Holy Empire, because these are also forms of strength that make the Holy Empire even stronger. Of course, this is also closely related to the Holy Empire's continuous expansion. A nation that constantly expands its territory will always be short of manpower. From its inception, the Holy Empire has been expanding and constantly waging war. However, their conquests did not rely entirely on force. As the Holy Empire grew stronger, many nations and regions chose to voluntarily submit to it. This was because they saw that joining the Holy Empire would bring greater stability, security, and even strength, and that the country respected talented individuals. In fact, the Holy Empire has always offered the nations it conquered such a choice: either swear allegiance to the Holy Empire and have your status determined solely by your worth, or be destroyed. Countless examples in a long history have shown that this is not an excuse or a trick. The people of the Holy Empire are true to their word, and many who submitted to the Holy Empire did indeed see their futures greatly improved. Of course, all those who defied the Holy Empire were ruthlessly crushed. Mentor Morrison, now waving his hands with fervor, like the mallet of a war drum, said, "Anyone, and I mean anyone, as long as they have talent, will inevitably be valued and given power, status, respect, and wealth in the Holy Empire. The Empire is the cradle of talent. In the Empire, regardless of background, as long as you have outstanding talent, you can rise to prominence." The Holy Empire's 3 greatest leaders, Grand Commander Duadov, is the best example. He was once just an orphan from a port city, struggling to survive in a slum through trickery and deception. When he was 12, the Empire conquered and annexed his port city. Then, the miracle began. His innate mage talent was discovered by the victorious commander of the Imperial Legion, who recruited him into the army and began training him. Thus, in the years that followed, he participated in countless expansionist campaigns with the Imperial Legion. his footprint spanning 3 continents. In the process, he grew steadily, climbing the ranks step by step under the Empire's meritocratic system. He rose from an unknown soldier to become the Grand Commander of the Imperial Holy Expeditionary Force. His surname, Adolf, also became one of the Empire's most illustrious surnames. Undoubtedly, Adolf's achievements are closely related to his own talent, but even more so to the Empire's system. Adolf's miracle could not have occurred in any other country or region besides the Holy Empire. The Empire values talent so highly that it actively seeks out exceptionally gifted mages, not only within the Empire but also outside of it. They contact outstanding mages in other countries, recruiting and training them, allowing their talents to be realized, and utilizing them most efficiently for the Empire's benefit. Instructor Morson's gaze swept across the faces of the students below. In other words, if any of you demonstrate outstanding talent, you might receive an invitation from the Holy Empire. Of course, their definition of outstanding is different from ours. Instructor Morson spread his hands, his impassioned emotions calming slightly. After all, Sean is just a small duchy. He paused for a moment, took a sip of water, seemingly a little thirsty from the flurry of words. Then, Instructor Morson's tone returned to calm as he slowly continued, however, there's nothing new under the sun. Although the Holy Empire has always upheld the political ideals of meritocratic rule and appointing people based on talent, the older generation of noble families, in fact, were originally barbarian tribes, only now they're called nobles, still wield considerable power in the heart of the Empire. Many believe that the biggest obstacle to the Holy Empire's continued expansion and growth is not external enemies, but the conflict between these old and new blood. This is an unavoidable contradiction in any world, under any system. After summarizing the problems of the Holy Empire, Instructor Morson snapped his fingers, and the light representing the Holy Empire's territory dimmed. Meanwhile, at the southernmost point of the 3D map, a small valley plain bordering the Irwinray Mountains, near the sea, suddenly lit up. This area was not large compared to the Holy Empire's territory, less than a quarter of it. But Gata understood that Morson would place it as the third area to be discussed in detail in this lesson, so it couldn't be simple. And indeed it was. This area is the territory of the Plantagenet dynasty. The Plantagenet dynasty was the last dynasty on the Nolan continent. It was a powerful dynasty that adhered to classical principles, with a glorious legacy and history of outstanding achievements, and still upholds the ancient doctrines of justice, honor, and responsibility. They have a long history, and although their territory is not large, their resources are the richest on the entire Nolan continent. Within the Plantagenet dynasty, there are fertile plains and valleys. Almost everywhere can be used for cultivation. Moreover, over 90% of their territory has been fully developed, unlike Shan, where more than half of their territory is uninhabited and dangerous. The Golden Flower dynasty also possesses the most ideal and standard bay on the entire continent, which they use to establish the second largest port on the Nolan continent. Furthermore, their border is adjacent to the Northern Territory, making it convenient to enter the Northern Territory whether crossing the Irwinray Mountains or taking the sea route. For the Golden Flower dynasty, the undeveloped but resource-rich Northern Territory can become their new frontier at any time, provided they are prepared. However, for this dynasty, these are secondary. What is truly important is that the Golden Flower dynasty possesses the most unique product in the entire material plane, the anti-magic stone, a magical mineral that can isolate magic. Weapons and armor crafted from anti-magic stone are the bane of magic. With the anti-magic stone, the Golden Flower dynasty can always stand tall on the Nolan continent, and is the only nation on this continent capable of rivaling the Holy Empire. Speaking of this, one could clearly sense a hint of envy from Instructor Morson. As a self-sufficient ancient dynasty, their rulers and subjects regarded the classical doctrines of justice, honor, and responsibility as supreme principles. This is their strength, and also their weakness. Gouda noticed that Instructor Morson subtly expressed a degree of respect when this was mentioned. Could it be that the Plantagenet dynasty's adherence to the classics wasn't just a verbal brainwashing declaration by the rulers, but a belief truly upheld and practiced? Gouda couldn't help but ponder. Because of the classics, they are conservative and xenophobic. The Plantagenet dynasty's mages pride themselves on their traditions and heritage, but at the same time, they are isolated from the world, failing to integrate into the ever-evolving trends of magic, continuing to pass down ancient spells. Many believe that the golden age of the Plantagenet dynasty is over, including me, unless it can adapt to the changing times. Instructor Morson gave his final assessment of the Plantagenet dynasty. But clearly, for this ancient dynasty, this is an impossible thing. Chapter 146 Ode to the Sea. Instructor Morson's political bias was quite obvious. Compared to his admiration for the Holy Empire, his attitude towards the Golden Flower dynasty was clearly pessimistic. However, this was also the opinion of most people. After all, the facts were undeniable. Snap. Instructor Morson snapped his fingers crisply, and the bright area representing the Golden Flower dynasty's territory also dimmed. The next moment, what lit up on the three-dimensional map of the Nolan continent was a remote corner located in the southeasternmost corner, by the sea. This is the location of Linhe City, the third largest power on the Nolan continent besides the Holy Empire and the Golden Flower dynasty. Linhe City? A city that could be more powerful than all the countries besides the Holy Empire and the Golden Flower dynasty? Upon hearing this, Gauda's pupils contracted slightly. In his understanding, this was an unbelievable thing. The power of a nation was like a huge machine. Once it started running, any warlords or local bullies would be flattened like toys. While Gauda was still in shock and confusion, Mosen had already begun his explanation in a very organized manner. Linhe City is built on the coast, hence its name. It is an exceptionally prosperous commercial and magical city, which has become an independent port metropolis due to free trade. Linhe City boasts the most prosperous commercial atmosphere and the freest academic atmosphere in the entire Mage Plain. The Nolan Magic Academy, established in Linhe City, is even considered the #1 magic academy on the Nolan continent, surpassing even the Imperial Magic Academy of the Holy Empire and the glorious Magic Academy of the Golden Flower dynasty. Linhe City's strength stems from its unique geographical advantages and is amplified by its vision and ideas. This is the Naliugia Strait, which is controlled by Linhe City. As Mosen finished speaking, a small area of sea adjacent to Linhe City was highlighted in red on the three-dimensional map formed by magic. The Strait of Naliugia is the most important maritime transportation artery in the entire Mage Plain. Located between the continents of Terra and Nolan, it is a vital sea passage and shipping hub for trade between the two continents. It is also adjacent to the Emerald Sea, across which lies the continent of Midgard. Trade is the lifeblood of Linhe City. Controlling the main trade routes between Terra and Nolan has made them incredibly wealthy. A constant stream of ships and airships pass through Linhe City's massive gate of the Sun Lock, bringing goods from all over the world and immeasurable wealth to Linhe City. As mentioned earlier when introducing the Golden Sparrow dynasty, they possess the second largest port on the Nolan continent, and the largest port on the Nolan continent does not belong to the Holy Empire, but to Linhe City. Ships and airships from all over the world dock or depart from Linhe City's never-setting sun port. At the never-setting sun port, even at night, it is brightly lit as if it were daytime. The prosperity of that scene is unimaginable to those who have not witnessed it firsthand. In fact, even Mosen, as the mentor, had never personally witnessed the prosperity of Linhe City. Therefore, his words had a somewhat theoretical flavor. Linhe City, possessing such immense wealth, does not belong to any country or power. It is completely independent. The four major merchant families control Linhe City: the Igor family, the Ian family, the Okenli family, and the Rune family. These four families each possess four core technologies: magical airships, auric crystals, alchemical weapons, and runic constructs. Using these technologies, they sell their products worldwide. Furthermore, after acquiring enormous wealth through Linhe City, these four families also invest heavily in various magical projects. This has resulted in countless workshops within Linhe City. The unprecedentedly developed workshops and the constant creation of new magical items fully demonstrate what substantial financial support means to mages. Linhe City has thus become the most technologically advanced city in magical craftsmanship in the world, a holy land in the hearts of countless mages, a city of freedom. It is said, Mosen said in an exaggerated tone, that the streets of Linhe City are paved with gold. During Mosen's explanation, an image similar to Shanghai was formed in Gaode's mind. Of course, in comparison, the prosperity of this coastal city far surpasses that of Shanghai. Ahem, Mosen coughed heavily, paused, and continued, perhaps you're wondering why the Holy Empire, with its ever-expanding territory bordering Linhe City, remains unmoved by such a tempting piece of meat. The reason is simple. It's not that they were unmoved, but that they can't afford to. Even a powerful empire like the Holy Empire can't bite into Linhe City. In fact, the Holy Empire's ability to expand its territory on Terra is inseparable from Linhe City's prosperity. Linhai City's port and magic airships make it relatively easy to transport our troops and supplies to Terra. Linhai City's alchemical weapons allow the Holy Empire to expand its territory on Terra even more easily. With the support of money and technology, the power of the four major merchant families is also unfathomable. They cannot be judged by ordinary standards of merchant families or clans. Most importantly, Linhai City possesses a set of the world's only 8th-tier rune constructs, Ode to the Sea. This set of 8th-tier rune constructs is to Linhai City what the anti-magic stone is to the Golden Flower Dynasty. As long as it exists, it will ensure Linhai City's survival. Mosin paused, seemingly allowing the students time to digest his words, before continuing. The light representing Linhai City disappeared, and the central region of the Nolan continent was highlighted on the 3D map. This area is between the Holy Empire and the Golden Flower Dynasty, containing over half of the Nolan continent's ley lines, vast undeveloped areas, and dozens of duchies of varying sizes. An Arzin duchy is located in this area. Instructor Mosin pointed to a small area near the Golden Flower Dynasty, marking it with a different color. This geography lesson finally touched upon the Xin duchy as it neared its end. Seeing the size of the Xin duchy on the map, Gata finally understood just how vast the entire Nolan continent was. In terms of area, the Duchy of Shan is equivalent to almost half of China, but on the map, it appears as a tiny fragment, like a piece of a puzzle. Strictly speaking, this area is actually a buffer zone between the Holy Empire and the Plantagenet dynasty, separating the two nations. Neither side is prepared for direct conflict, so they allow this buffer zone to exist, ensuring their territories don't directly border each other, thus avoiding potential escalation of friction. Otherwise, if the Holy Empire so desires, within a year, all the duchies in this heartland will either be conquered or destroyed. Mosin made no attempt to conceal Shan's weakness, stating it bluntly. He even made a rebellious statement: when that happens, it might actually be a good thing for the people of Shan, since joining the Holy Empire would allow for greater development. Alright, that concludes today's lesson. Class dismissed. Instructor Mosin waved his hand, announcing the end of Get Out of Class. The three-dimensional map model on the whiteboard vanished without a trace as Mosin left. Chapter 147 Accumulation. Ode to the Sea. 8th-tier rune construction. A single set of 8th-tier rune constructions is enough to ensure the survival of Linhai City. As Gauda followed the crowd out of the classroom, his mind was still somewhat immersed in Instructor Morsen's introduction. He realized that although he had been studying runeology for nearly 10 days, he still knew nothing about rune constructions. And according to the introduction of his instructor, Hosey O'Kenley, his specialty was rune constructions. He hadn't even finished learning the basic runes step by step, so what was the point of introducing rune constructions to him? Gauda was rational and didn't think that Hosey O'Kenley had never mentioned rune constructions to him because he was keeping them a secret. As his thoughts raced, he felt that he seemed to have overlooked something. It wasn't until he reached the training building that Gauda slapped his forehead and realized what had happened. The Fang of Hidden Mist, the O'Kenley Merchant Guild, one of the four great merchant families of Linhai City, the O'Kenley family, Hosey O'Kenley. Is this a coincidence? This wasn't the first time he'd heard the name O'Kenley. To be precise, it was the third time. Shortly after arriving in this world, Gauda had heard of the O'Kenley family in Hogan City and even bought what was supposedly made by the O'Kenley Merchant Guild, the Fang of Hidden Mist. That was the first time he'd heard the name O'Kenley. The second time was with his mentor, Hosey O'Kenley. If my mentor really is from the O'Kenley family, there's no reason for him to leave prosperous Linhai City and come to the Duchy of Xinan, which is like a rural farm compared to Linhai City. Moreover, Linhai City is in the southeast corner of the Nolan continent, while the Duchy of Xinan is in the northwest corner, near the Golden Flower Dynasty. The two places are so far apart, it makes even less sense. Gauda pondered for a while, but ultimately concluded it must be a coincidence. Even the powerful O'Kenley Merchant Guild wouldn't monopolize the O'Kenley surname. Therefore, one can't assume someone with the surname O'Kenley is a member of the O'Kenley family. While pondering this, Gauda entered the cultivation building, easily booked a room at the front desk, and began his cultivation for the day. He had tried several jars of fruit drinks brewed with lurkless water over the past few days. Aside from the different flavors due to the different fruits, the effects were essentially the same as the original lurkless water. At least, Gauda couldn't perceive any difference. With the combined benefits of the specially made fruit drinks and the first-tier cultivation room, Gauda's progress in guiding his cultivation method had been rapid these past few days. On the 12th of the dark gold moon, he had just achieved a breakthrough in guiding his method. Now, only 20 days later, Gauda vaguely sensed that the next breakthrough was not far off. This visible rate of improvement made Gauda even more enthusiastic about his cultivation. After spending 2.5 hours finishing his cultivation for the day, Gauda hurriedly left the cultivation building. After having dinner at the restaurant, he rushed to the breeding room to carry out today's poisonous insect breeding task. The reward was another +1 to the collection progress of the phantom thorn centipede's essence. It was only at this point, when Gauda officially entered the student stage, that he truly understood why every student he encountered in the academy seemed to be in a hurry. It wasn't that the students of Seer's Academy were pretentious, but rather that they were genuinely busy. Classes, cultivation, academy tasks, everything required a significant amount of time and energy. Frosty Gold Month, Day 3. Gauda was even busier today. His elective required course, Basic Mage Training, officially started today. Since Basic Mage Training was taught in the morning, Gauda had informed Hizite in advance, and today's rune literature course was moved to the afternoon. This was one of the advantages of learning with a mentor. At least in terms of time, it was more flexible and could be adjusted appropriately. The name Basic Mage Training sounded unremarkable, but it was actually very substantial, otherwise, it wouldn't have been listed as one of the 3 required courses by the Academy. This was Gauda's first time receiving formal and systematic magical education. The composition of a mage's power isn't complex, but it's not simply a matter of comparing mage levels and the number of spells mastered. While it's certainly better for mages of the same level to master more spells, it shouldn't be the sole criterion. Besides mage level and the number of spells, a mage's power also depends on their knowledge, magical equipment, wealth, and expertise. Actually, besides these 4, there's another, the mage's wisdom. However, this varies from person to person and cannot be quantified, so we won't discuss it for now. This course aims to broaden your knowledge, thereby increasing your power. The instructor, Bo Wei, was a short, stout, middle-aged mage. The first lesson, Mage Basics, taught students how to effectively improve cultivation efficiency while keeping the environment and cultivation methods constant. This wasn't anything special for a second-generation mage. Every mage family had its own secrets in this area. But for Gauda, it was invaluable. He had never imagined that improving his method could further enhance the efficiency of his guided practice. Gauda listened with exceptional focus during this lesson. Breathing is the source of life and the anchor of the soul. We obtain the nutrients we need through breathing. Similarly, proper breathing techniques allow us to unconsciously and automatically inhale a portion of magical energy during practice. This unconsciously inhaled magical energy is certainly incomparable to the magical energy we consciously introduce into our bodies through mental power and guided methods, but its advantage lies in its constant presence and gradual accumulation. In reality, it wasn't complicated, it was simply about adjusting and controlling one's breathing. Then, Bo Wei demonstrated a breathing technique called deep sea breathing. This required students to inhale slowly and deeply, as if struggling to draw in meager oxygen in the deep sea. Gauda tried it, initially finding the breathing rhythm very strange and uncomfortable. Several instances of fluctuating inhalation and exhalation almost made him unable to breathe, causing him to cough violently. But this was, after all, not a complex spell or profound technique, it was merely a breathing technique. So after a few tries, Gauda adapted to the rhythm and felt the superiority of this breathing method. Although he hadn't tried it during his cultivation yet, Gauda could clearly feel that the oxygen he inhaled with each breath was far greater than before. This was already quite remarkable. This breathing method can also make you more focused during meditation, slightly improving the efficiency of meditation practice. Of course, it's very slight, but better than nothing. Finally, Bo Wei added a few more points about the benefits of the deep sea breathing method before announcing the end of get out of class. With the arrival of the frosty golden moon, Gauda's 8 courses began one after another. Apart from rune literature, which he had applied for exemption from, the other 7 courses, basic mage skills, spell application and combat, basic culture, general spells, 0 and 3 rings, introduction, geography and war geography of the Nolan continent, general knowledge of herbs, and cultivation of magical plants, were all carefully selected by Gauda, as they were the basic knowledge he currently lacked the most. He naturally attended every class on time, never late or absent. He also couldn't bear to miss a class. These were courses he had chosen at great expense, and Gauda was well aware of the exorbitant cost of such knowledge. Especially the courses understanding general spells, 0 and 3 rings, and general knowledge of herbs, whose content had always been considered precious knowledge, kept secret by nobles and never easily shared. For a mage like Gauda, born into poverty, being able to learn these courses was incredibly fortunate. The Understanding General Spells, 0 and 3 Rings course introduced the names, effects, limitations, and even countermeasures of common 0-3 ring spells, everything related to spells. Moreover, while described as general spells, it also included introductions to some rarer spells. This one-credit knowledge-based course covered a total of 35 0-ring spells, 55 1-ring spells, 55 2-ring spells, and 45 3-ring spells. As for general knowledge of herbs, it introduced students to over 500 types of magical potions and herbs. The course content includes the names, effects, value, appearance, harvesting precautions, and preservation points of medicinal herbs, and even knowledge points about commonly used potions. It's not difficult, but it's complex. These two courses are equivalent to humanities subjects. Understanding them isn't hard, but memorizing all the knowledge points and passing the final exam to earn credits requires considerable effort. One course alone wouldn't be so difficult. However, with Gauda taking both, the amount of memorization required is much greater. But for Gauda, who experienced the education system of his previous life, memorization is extremely easy to grasp. He memorizes the day's knowledge points before bed and reviews them again in the morning. On the weekend, he sets aside a full day to review all the week's knowledge points. After 3 rounds of this, the memory is already quite deep. Since the beginning of Frost Moon, Gauda's daily rest time has been reduced to less than 5 hours. He often memorizes knowledge points until 1 or 2 in the morning before going to sleep, and gets up around 6. He felt like he had become a machine, repeating the same monotonous study and training without any entertainment. No wonder the staff member hesitated to speak when he saw that he had selected 8 courses at once. Chapter 148 Credit Ranking. Gauda diligently and systematically went about his business each day. He maintained a good mindset and overall condition. 8 courses. Anyone who has attended high school, even excluding miscellaneous subjects like physical education and music, would have at least 6 courses, right? And compared to the numerous homework assignments after school, the courses at Sayre's Academy were practically homework-free, much more relaxed. Sleeping at 1 or 2 in the morning, waking up at 6, wasn't that the daily routine of a senior high school student? Not to mention, Gauda also had the leak-free fruit drink, which relieved fatigue. Time flew by. On enrollment day, 21 new students were admitted, including a first-ring mage. These events drew the attention of everyone in the academy. Gauda initially gained a small amount of fame because he was targeted by Jerry Harrell, the top student of the alchemy department, in the cafeteria, and because he broke the record left by the former dean during the enrollment mission. After that, he lived a monotonous life, either cultivating in the training building, attending classes in various teaching buildings, learning basic runes in the rune workshop, and mostly cultivating poisonous insects in the breeding room. Gauda never actively sought to get to know others, much less cause trouble. He was like an invisible man. Therefore, as time passed, this lucky guy who entered the academy with the highest honors thanks to Dean Gavin's recommendation letter and whose fame had briefly spread, quickly faded from public attention and was completely forgotten. After all, most people were quite rational. Even though many students had felt some jealousy and resentment towards Gauda for gaining admission with the highest honors, unless it was a special case like Gray Harrell's, who would inexplicably target someone completely unrelated to them and make an enemy for no reason? Everyone was busy. Unless there was a deep-seated hatred, no one had the time to keep an eye on others. Moreover, everyone later learned that Gauda's assigned senior mentor was Jose O'Kenley from the Rune Department, the long-forgotten chief Rune mentor. Suddenly, even their jealousy vanished, replaced by schadenfreude. Even Gray Harrell seemed to have forgotten about Gauda. Aside from stopping Gauda at the restaurant initially, he hadn't appeared before him again. In the entire academy, perhaps only Instructor Jose and Instructor Shaw truly knew Gauda. The former was self-evident, while the latter occasionally checked on Gauda's progress with his poisonous insect cultivation quest, maintaining regular contact. But regardless of what others thought, Gauda was extremely satisfied with his current life. His mage level was increasing at a considerable pace, his rune knowledge was steadily rising by 5 runes per day, his most lacking area, mage knowledge, was rapidly being filled, and his poisonous insect cultivation quest was progressing steadily, with a phantom thorn centipede essence fully collected. Everything was thriving except for his saving 77 gold and 19 silver, that was Gouda's current total savings. On the 10th of Frost Gold month, the usage time of the first-tier training room Gouda had previously purchased was completely used up. He gritted his teeth and splurged another 10 gold coins to secure 40 hours of use in the Tier 1 training room. His savings balance had plummeted to 67 gold and 14 silver after this. On the 17th of Frost Gold month, two things happened. First, Jerica finally completed her enrollment mission. It took her 43 days, 18 days earlier than the average 61 days for the mining route. This wasn't surprising, as Jerica's stamina couldn't compare to the male students or those from ordinary backgrounds. However, as a second-generation mage and rich heiress, she could continuously drink stamina recovery potions to quickly replenish her daily energy. This was enough to easily overcome the stamina gap and allow her to achieve better results. Of course, Gaod's information network wasn't that efficient. The reason they knew this was because after completing her enrollment mission, Jerica actually went to Gaod's place to buy leak-free water. 43 days of mining had left the young lady of the city lord's mansion exhausted, and she wanted to use Gouda's magical fruit drink to recover. Gouda thought for a moment and took a small flask from his already dwindling supply of special fruit drinks to give to Jerica. However, this time Jerica resolutely refused to get it for free, and Gouda had no choice but to accept 10 gold from her. If I could consistently produce leak-free water, I wouldn't have to worry about money, Gouda couldn't help but think after this ordeal. However, he knew this was just wishful thinking. Since the first time he got leak-free water, Gouda hadn't stocked his daily first draw, but over the past 10 days, most of his results were the guaranteed honey water, plus 2 malt liquors and 1 superior honey water. Leak-free water simply didn't exist. Another thing was that on this day, Gouda's channeling technique made another breakthrough, reaching a new level. His current total mana was enough to support him casting 10 spells in one go. Gouda had already completed half of the 20 spells required of a third-class mage apprentice to unleash in one go. His last breakthrough in guiding his cultivation was on the 12th of the Dark Night Moon. These two breakthroughs were only 35 days apart. Such efficiency was truly genius level. Of course, this was the product of the combined effects of the leak-free water, the first-tier cultivation room, and improved breathing. It wasn't a genuine improvement in his own aptitude. These external aids and methods provided the greatest boost to mage like Gouda, whose aptitude was neither too bad nor too good. It's somewhat like tutoring improving a student's grades. Tutoring isn't very helpful for exceptionally good or very bad students, but it's precisely through tutoring that average students can achieve significant improvement. However, the leak-free water, having not been replenished, would be completely depleted in 3 days at the current rate. At that point, Gouda's progress in guiding his cultivation would slow down slightly. But Gouda had no solution to this problem. If I had better aptitude, I wouldn't have to spend so much money on cultivation, he couldn't help but think. Just like with studying, Gouda had watched his classmates spend vast sums of money on various tutoring classes and so-called famous teachers and private tutors, yet they still couldn't compare to him, who never attended tutoring classes or had private tutors. He didn't feel superior, but he felt sorry for them spending that money. Now, Gouda finally understood his classmates' helplessness. Did they feel bad about spending that money? Of course they did, but they had no choice. With average aptitude, the only way to improve their grades was to pave the way with money. Just like him now. Is there any way to improve my aptitude? This question popped into Gouda's mind. Logically, there should be. Demand determines the market. The mage system has developed for so many years, there must be countless mages who want to improve their aptitude. Even if it's just a matter of luck, they should have stumbled upon one or two methods. But even if such methods existed, they weren't something he, as a mage apprentice, could access. He still needed to become a formal mage first. 1,000 thoughts raced through Gouda's mind, but in the end, they all boiled down to a sigh. One must take things one step at a time. And more urgent than becoming a formal mage was earning money. Even with the extra 10 gold coins from Jelica, bringing Gouda's savings back to 77 gold, it was clear that this amount wouldn't last long within the Cyrus Academy. At least for now, Gouda didn't dare buy spell recipes, fearing that this expense would plunge him into a financial crisis. However, It's worth mentioning that Gata had just learned a couple of days ago that Cyrus Academy had a mechanism similar to a scholarship. More accurately, it was a credit ranking system. At the end of each academic year, the Academy would reward the top-ranked students on the credit ranking to support outstanding students and allow them more time to dedicate to their training. Of course, there wasn't just one ranking. The Academy would rank students according to their academic years at the Academy. This made sense, just like the final stage of the Rune Literature course, which was worth 7 credits, while the first stage was only worth 1 credit. If rankings weren't based on academic year, the rewards for this credit ranking would be monopolized by returning students who could take high-credit courses. However, the rankings aren't very detailed. There are only 4 rankings in total. The first is a credit ranking specifically for new students, allowing only those who have just entered the Academy to participate. The rewards for the new student credit ranking are the most generous of the 4. The new student ranked first in credits that year receives a full 100 gold coins, second place receives 80 gold coins, and third place receives 60 gold coins. The second ranking is for students in their first to third academic year, and the rewards are slightly less generous compared to the new student rankings. The first ranked student receives 50 gold coins, second place receives 40 gold coins, and third place receives 30 gold coins. The third ranking is for students in their third to fifth academic year, with the same rewards as students in their first to third academic year. Finally, there is a ranking for students in their fifth academic year and above, with the same rewards as the previous rankings. Chapter 149, The Spawn of the Insect Swarm. At Cyrus Academy, a complete academic year is calculated from the frost moon of the current year to the frost moon of the following year. Credits earned beyond this period are counted towards the next academic year. This coincides with the Academy's enrollment period. However, some second-generation mages are admitted to the Academy before the enrollment period begins. But there is no claim that their academic year is longer than that of newly admitted students who pass the entrance exam. A magic academy with thousands of years of history would not have such a low-level loophole. For these new students who enter the Academy early, the Academy calculates their first academic year from the date of their entry. For example, if Gauda entered Cyrus Academy on the 2nd of Dark Night Moon, his first academic year would be from the 2nd of Dark Night Moon of the current year to the 2nd of Dark Night Moon of the following year. Then, there is a 1-month gap in the middle, and the second academic year is calculated according to the standard schedule, from the frost moon of the current year to the end of the frost moon of the following year. Of course, these second-generation mages don't care about the rewards on the credit leaderboard. However, credits have many uses within the Academy, and even second-generation mages need to try to earn as many credits as possible. That's undeniable. Upon learning about the freshman credit rankings and the corresponding huge rewards, Gauda was instantly tempted. 100 gold coins were enough for him to buy a dozen or so zero-ring spell recipes. He naturally wanted to fight for this reward. In fact, in previous years, Gauda would have had a good chance. Because he broke Dean Gavin's record in the entrance mission, he received a full 5 credits. With a mage level calculation, even before taking a single course, Gauda already had 10 credits, putting him ahead of other freshmen. The problem is, this year is different. This year's freshmen include a freak who advanced to 1-ring mage at the age of 14, Yarlin. A 14-year-old first-ring mage firstly earns credits based on their mage level assessment. 1 credit for a first-ranked mage apprentice, 2 credits for a second-ranked mage apprentice, 3 credits for a third-ranked mage apprentice, and 5 credits for an initial first-ring mage. This totals 11 credits, already exceeding Gauda's 10 credits. Furthermore, students who advance to first-ring mage before the age of 20 receive an additional 3 credits, with an extra credit for each year earlier. Yulon, at 14, receives a total of 3 plus 6 equals 9 credits. This means that simply by enrolling, he will receive 20 credits. Adding the 2 credits from the enrollment task, he starts with 22 credits. Gauda, who has always been academically superior, feels immense pressure regarding his grades for the first time. He has currently chosen 8 courses. If he completes them all and passes the assessments, he will earn a total of 13 credits, bringing his total to 23 credits, just surpassing Yulon's 22 credits. The problem is, Yulon can't possibly skip all her classes for a year, so her credits will definitely increase. Gauda, however, has a tenacious spirit. In this situation, most people would know that first place is unlikely and would aim for second. After all, The difference in reward between second and first place is only 20 gold coins. But Gata was precisely motivated by this unlikely situation. Instead of aiming for second place, he set his sights on first. His approach was twofold: take as many courses as possible and meet certain academy standards to earn extra credits. On the 20th of Frost Gold month, the leak-free fruit drink was finally exhausted. On the 27th of Frost Gold month, the previously purchased first-tier training room usage time was almost gone, forcing Gata to spend 10 gold coins to buy another 40 hours. And on this day, another event occurred. Of the 269 poisonous insect eggs that Instructor Shaw estimated would take a month and a half to hatch, only 3 remained unhatched on the 34th day since accepting the mission. As an academy instructor, Shaw didn't bother with the remaining scraps and directly settled Gata's wages ahead of schedule. 269 insect eggs, 266 have hatched so far. After you sorted and removed the defective ones, there are 79 fire-patterned ant larvae, 54 scorpion larvae, and 29 phantom thorn centipede larvae remaining, totaling 167 qualified venomous insect larvae. The pass rate is about 60%. This is the extra reward I promised you. After checking the venomous insect larvae in the large incubator, Instructor Shaw nodded in satisfaction and handed Gata 5 Sean gold coins. As for the mission reward, you'll have to collect it from the logistics department yourself. I'll notify them later that you've completed the mission. Gata accepted the 5 gold coins, nodding his thanks as he took out the key to the incubation room from his pocket and returned it to Shaw. Having completed the mission 11 days ahead of schedule and received an extra 5 gold coins, Gata left the incubation room in high spirits. Whether the higher-ups in the academy are good or bad is hard to say, but at least most of the instructors are decent. Arriving at the logistics department's mission hall, Gata queued to settle his mission. As he had said, Shaw had indeed confirmed with the logistics department that he had completed the mission. So, after swiping his identity badge, the staff handed Gata the mission reward, a rare zero-ring spell recipe, Insect Swarm. He put away the spell recipe, not rushing back to build the spell model, but instead browsing the mission bulletin board in the mission hall. Since the poisonous insect breeding mission was already complete, Gata planned to see if there were any other suitable missions to take on. He was short of money. In the extraordinary world, one had to work hard to support oneself. Since most academy missions either had mage-level requirements or knowledge requirements, requiring completion of certain academy courses before accepting them, even though there were many missions listed on the bulletin board, it wasn't easy for Gata, still in the starting from scratch stage, to accept a suitable mission that met the requirements. However, Gata was lucky today. He had only glanced at the bulletin board a few times when he noticed a sudden jump on the mission bulletin board. The next second, a new task appeared at the top of the bulletin board. This meant it was a task issued by the Academy Mountain Patrol. A malfunction in the pet system's magic array has caused a large number of red-eyed sparrows to escape and enter the Academy's back mountain. Help the Academy Patrol and hunt these red-eyed sparrows to prevent them from affecting the mountain's ecosystem. The reward is based on the number of red-eyed sparrows hunted. Each sparrow killed earns 1 gold. Red-eyed sparrow eyeballs are used as proof of purchase. There are no level requirements for accepting this task. This is a long-term task with no limit on the number of participants or the time limit. Note, except for red-eyed sparrows, no other plants in the back mountain may be picked. Violators will be punished. Red-eyed sparrows are zero-ring lealine creatures, kept by the pet system for high-altitude reconnaissance. After appropriate training, they are extremely vigilant, adept at concealment, and not very aggressive. The entire Sears Mountains, including the back mountain and the water area below the Creeper Cliff, belong to the Academy. Students are not allowed to approach without permission, and are strictly prohibited from collecting resources from them. For example, the made clams in the waters of Cooley Cliff are like fish raised in a fish pond by a fish pond owner. Unauthorized harvesting of clams is considered misappropriation of Academy assets. Even with permission, such as for an enrollment task, the harvested clams must be handed over, essentially earning credits through work. Otherwise, Gata would have made a living this way long ago, instead of being troubled by money now. While pondering this, Gata went to the task processing counter, submitted his identity badge, and applied to accept the Mountain Patrol task. Why not accept it? This kind of task has no restrictions. Even if he doesn't necessarily do it, he'll accept it first, since there's no penalty. Moreover, the red-eyed sparrow is a lealine creature, Completing the task will not only reward him with gold coins but also allow him to obtain primordial energy. The staff, after recording his information, handed Gauda a pass to enter the back mountain, a map of the restricted area, and a portrait of the red-eyed sparrow to prevent him from making a mistake. They also provided some information, including the red-eyed sparrow's preferred habitat and common concealment methods. Most of these restricted areas are potion-growing regions, and they're all protected by barriers or magic arrays. However, it's best to avoid them if possible, the staff member instructed Gauda, pointing to the restricted areas marked on the map of the back mountain. Gauda took the information, nodded to the staff member to indicate he understood, and then turned to leave. Back in Building 30 of Zone 1, Gauda immediately took out the rare spell recipe he had just acquired and began to examine it. Swarm Insects Conjuration, Zero Ring. You cause a creature within 30 feet of you that you can see to temporarily be infested with mites, fleas, mosquitoes, and other insects. The target suffers some toxin damage depending on their physical strength and is affected by negative statuses such as itching and paralysis. After reading the spell description of swarm insects, Gauda instantly understood why it was a rare spell recipe. As the staff in the quest hall had explained, the spell's damage wasn't particularly outstanding. The negative statuses like itching and paralysis weren't particularly fatal in combat either. The attack method was novel, but that was about it. But this spell is actually a targeted skill. It has no casting trajectory. As long as the target is within casting range, it will take effect on the target. This is equivalent to having two built-in effects, 100% hit rate and instant effect. The name rare spell is truly well deserved. This proves that ordinary spells aren't necessarily bad, but rare spells are rare precisely because they have something special about them. Chapter 150. This lesson can't go on. The spell model for Swarm Spawn is a standard 10-node spell model. Gauda took out paper and pen, and spent a few minutes establishing a coordinate system, converting the 10 nodes into corresponding ternary array coordinates. After spending some more time memorizing these 10 ternary arrays, he began attempting to construct the Swarm Spawn spell model. Spell application in combat, one of the 3 compulsory courses at Sayre's Academy, is extremely rich in both content and format. The first few lessons are purely theoretical. After the theoretical lessons, the teaching venue changes from the classroom to an outdoor spell experiment field. The spell experiment field was established by the Academy specifically for students and instructors to test the power of spells. After all, spells generally have immense destructive power and various additional effects, such as the corrosiveness of acid splashes. Otherwise, if a dedicated area were set up for mages to test their spells, allowing them to cast spells anywhere, the Academy would eventually be demolished. As a spell experiment field, it is naturally built in the most remote location of the Academy, far from the crowds, to avoid disturbing the residents. The area is enormous, surrounded by a ring of solid gray granite, with intricate composite runes painted on the walls. Gauda, who has been studying runes for over a month, can recognize some basic level 0 runes like solidification, magic gathering, and isolation. This is to prevent mages with questionable aim from blasting spells out of bounds, and to prevent powerful mages from accidentally injuring passers-by with the aftershocks of their spells. The spell testing area has a large public space and private rooms. The public space is cheaper, but it requires sharing with others, which can be disruptive and expose one's spells. Most mages highly value the 3 fundamental principles of mageship and don't want their spells revealed. Therefore, the more expensive and smaller private rooms are more popular. Of course, since it's a class, it can only be conducted in the public space. Furthermore, it's free. The course fee likely includes the cost of using the spell testing area. The large public area was quite spacious, roughly the size of a multi-purpose athletic field in Gaod's previous life. At the very center of the area stood dozens of trial puppets created by the alchemy department. Yes, these were trial puppets made from the water gold ore mined during the freshman enrollment mission. The puppets were entirely the pale gold color of the water gold ore, with intricate patterns carved into their surfaces. Their eyes were black modules resembling electronic displays, but their surfaces weren't completely smooth. Instead, they were covered with tiny runes and grooves, the purpose of which was currently unknown. The same spell, not to mention the vast difference in power between a mage apprentice and a first-rank mage, will have a huge impact even between mages of the same level. The application, control, and understanding of spells can make the same spell drastically different in the hands of different mages. Mastering a spell isn't just about constructing a spell model. Successfully constructing a spell model is merely the starting point for mastering that spell. How to apply it is a much deeper and more enduring subject. The instructor of spell application and combat, Fallon, spoke with great enthusiasm. Gauda listened attentively and largely agreed. It's like the same Tai Chi. In Zhang Sanfeng's hands, it's about using minimal force to overcome great strength, defeating one or two opponents at a time. But in the hands of an old man in the park, it's about demanding a fortune if you dare to come. Of course, this analogy is extreme, but that's the gist of it. You might not understand yet, so let me give you an example. Fallon nodded in satisfaction, seeing everyone listening attentively. He decided to give a live demonstration to reinforce the trainees' understanding and encourage them to pay closer attention to the practical exercises to come. The mage's hand should be a trick that all of you have mastered, Fallon said, already casting the spell. He guided the mage's hand towards one of the trial puppets. As you know, the mage's hand can replace our hands in most situations to manipulate, carry, or move objects. It's a frequently used trick. However, the mage's hand also has limitations. One is that it cannot bear objects weighing more than 10 pounds. Of course, this limitation can be overcome as your mage level increases. For example, my current mage's hand can carry objects weighing over 30 pounds. Another limitation is that a mage's hand can only perform simple actions. It cannot complete complex commands, but this limitation can be overcome through practice. As your understanding and mastery of it improves, watch closely, Fallon said, manipulating the mage's hand at the chest of the trial puppet under everyone's watchful eyes. Several metal parts were ingeniously connected, seamlessly fitting a thin, crab shell-like structure onto the puppet's chest. Farron's task was to disassemble these parts. The work wasn't difficult, but it required precision. The mage's hand could perform some manipulation, but it was inadequate for such highly precise work. However, after some effort, Farron managed to control the mage's hand to actually disassemble the metal parts. Then, he removed the outer shell from the puppet's chest, revealing a recess in the puppet's chest. Inside the recess was a magic crystal, now gray, indicating its energy was completely depleted. Farron temporarily placed the metal parts on the ground and then retrieved the depleted magic crystal from the recess. Next, Farron controlled the mage's hand to retrieve a brand new standard magic crystal from a nearby box and placed it into the recess. Using the spellcaster puppet requires magic crystals for power. While demonstrating, Farron explained the puppet to everyone. Seeing the magic crystals were installed, Farron nodded in satisfaction and released a mage's hand. When you can use the mage's hand to change magic crystals on the puppet like I can, then your mastery of the mage's hand will be truly profound. Of course, it's unlikely you'll reach my level in a short time, but don't be discouraged. As he spoke, Farron's gaze swept across the students' faces, finally settling on one. You try it, me. Gauda, randomly chosen by Farron, was somewhat taken aback. Yes, try my operation with the mage's hand, Farron nodded, pointing to another puppet beside him. Letting the students experience it firsthand, and then comparing it to his demonstration, would better demonstrate that the application, control, and understanding of spells can make the same spell drastically different in the hands of different mages. Gauda hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped forward. A thought flashed through his mind, and he activated the Mage's Hand Plus spell model from his spell array, summoning an invisible ghostly hand that moved to the chest of the trial puppet. Farron smiled slightly, already anticipating what would happen next. He calmly bent down, picked up the metal parts from the ground, and assembled them with both hands onto the chest of the trial puppet. Assembling was far more intricate than disassembling. It was beyond the capabilities of the mage's hand and required personal skill. But just as Farron finished installing the outer shell, he heard a crisp click. It was the sound of the mechanism on the trial puppet's chest being unlocked. Farron's eyes widened, and he turned to look at the source of the sound. It came from the very trial puppet he had designated for Gauda to try. The outer shell on its chest had already been opened. To Fallon's astonishment, God controlled a mage hand, just as he had demonstrated, removing the depleted magic crystal and replacing it with a new one. How did he disassemble the metal parts of the trial puppet? Fallon, who had missed the initial disassembly process due to his focus on assembling the parts, couldn't help but wonder. But God wasn't finished. After replacing the magic crystal, he focused intently on controlling the mage hand, picking up the metal parts temporarily placed on the ground, and awkwardly began operating on the puppet's chest. Assembly was far more difficult than disassembly. And God didn't want to reveal that he had two mage hands, so he could only operate one, making it somewhat challenging for him. Fortunately, after some effort, he managed to painstakingly cover the shell on the trial puppet's chest. Seeing that everything was finished, God breathed a sigh of relief, wiped the sweat from his brow, and snapped out of his reverie. "Master Fallon, is that right?" he asked, looking at Fallon. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.